Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the West Hollywood Planning Commission. This is a special meeting called because our agendas have been quite full and active, and we needed an additional meeting to be able to have the items come before us in a timely manner. For those of you who are in the audience, please be aware, unfortunately, we had a little mishap. The agendas that are in the back, if you look at them, they're really for the December 7th meeting. So I'm going to be announcing the items as we move through it, because today is only Thursday, November 30th. It'll also be available, I believe, on your screen, so you can follow along with us that way, and we do apologize for that. We're jumping the gun. So I'd like to call the meeting to order. And I'm going to call on John Kehoe. Would you come please and lead us in the flag salute?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, hang on just a second.
Mr. Gilly, could you call the roll, please?
Yes, good evening. And it looks like we're having some technical difficulty with our screen, so we'll work through that too.
We'll work through it.
Yeah. Tonight, our Vice Chair Jones is absent, so the record will reflect that. Commissioner Hoopengarner?
Here.
Commissioner Calvalero?
Here.
Commissioner Bass?
Here.
Commissioner Elchel?
Here.
Commissioner Agai?
Here.
Chair Buckner?
Here.
And we have a quorum.
Thank you. The next item is the approval of the agenda, which is this agenda for Thursday, November 30th. Do I have a motion? Mic is on. I'm sorry if you're not hearing me. We're on the approval of the agenda. I'm asking for a motion.
Vote.
Our secretary's a little busy and catching up to us. We just had a motion.
Commissioner Agai moved it, seconded by Commissioner Hoopengarner. And the motion passes unanimously.
The next item is item number 5, which is approval of the minutes from our last meeting, which was the November 16th meeting. Unfortunately, because of the need to have this extra meeting, we didn't get that done, so we're going to recommend that we continue this item to Thursday, December 7th for the approval of the November 16th meeting. Is there a vote in favor of that? Motion and vote?
Moved by Commissioner Agai, seconded by Commissioner Hoopengarner. And the motion carries unanimously.
We're moving on to item number 6, which is an opportunity for the public to come to the podium to address the commission on any item that is not an item that's actually agendized tonight. Those speakers will speak on the items as they're called to the floor. So if there are some speakers who want to address, please come forward and state your name, full name, and your city of residence.
Public comment.
And you have 3 minutes to speak.
And we have no public comment at this time.
No public comment at this time. Okay, we'll move on then to the director's report. Mr. Kehoe.
Good evening, Chair and members of the Commission. Just give you an update on some of the items that are going to be going to the City Council on Monday. We have a busy agenda of CDD items on the Council agenda. So on their consent agenda, we have a status report on zone text amendments that we're processing. We also have on the consent agenda our analysis of live-work facilities and home business ordinance. Those are on the City Council's consent calendar. And then public hearings that the City Council will be taking a look at are the zone text amendment to revise the accessory dwelling unit regulations that the Planning Commission already looked at. There's also a public hearing for the project located at 9001 Santa Monica Boulevard. That's the project that had it was a mixed-use project with a development agreement approved many years ago, and they're asking for an extension on the life of the development permit. And then there's also another zone text amendment that the Commission looked at recently regarding the implementing the R4BC and R3CC zoning districts. So the Council will also have an active meeting with CDD items. So thank you very much.
Any commissioners have a question of our director? Seeing none. Thank you, John. The next item is a item number 9. Excuse me, items from commissioners. Anybody have any want to take the?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Just two things. One, the item that's on the consent calendar, I would just ask that staff, when they present that to council, that it reflect the votes that happened related to each item as it was presented in the item today. And then I would also like to ask the chair that when we address the public benefits policy, that we actually break it into the 3 components staff outlined in our discussion and sort of break each one into a separate conversation so that we don't kind of go at cross purposes and have a conversation about the actual policy itself, then the tool, and then the menu of benefits.
Okay, we'll take that up when we come to the item. Thank you. So the first item on consent calendar is zone text amendment regarding multifamily R3 and R4 zones. Excuse me. On November 16th, there was a public hearing on this item. It's on consent because we're merely going to move it on to council, and the resolution does reflect what was determined at that time, with the addition that we forward it with the suggestion by Commissioner Huppenhuger. Motion?
And the motion carries unanimously, noting Vice Chair Jones absent.
And for those of you who haven't been here with us before, we're going to move now into the public hearing portion of our meeting. For those of you, what happens is we have our staff give a report first, and then we have an opportunity to ask questions of staff. Then we move on to the presentation by the applicant, who has 10 minutes, and then we have members of the public who can come and speak on the item itself, and that each person have 3 minutes, and then we have the applicant has an opportunity to rebut whatever was brought up if they want to at that point, and there's opportunities for commission to ask questions, and then we may or may not close the public meeting, and we'll go into deliberation on the item itself. So with that, if you want to speak on any of the particular items, please see our secretary and fill out a public speaking slip. Staff report on the first item, 10A, 8711, 8713 Beverly Boulevard, and the 321, 327 Sherborne Drive.
Good evening, Commissioners. Before you tonight is a request to demolish an existing nightclub restaurant building at 8713 Beverly Boulevard, and the demolition of an adjacent surface parking lot behind the property along Sherborne Drive. The entire project site involves 3 consecutive lots. The applicant is proposing to construct a new 5-story mixed-use building with commercial and residential, including 26 apartment buildings, 4 that are affordable, and 2 levels of subterranean parking. The proposed project utilizes density FAR bonuses because the project is a mixed-use development that would provide affordable housing on site pursuant to the California State Density Bonus Law. The proposal also requires adoption of the Mitigated Negative Declaration and Mitigation Monitoring and Reporting Program pursuant to the California Environmental Quality Act guidelines. On April 6th, the Planning Commission denied the above-mentioned request, citing building incompatibility with scale, bulk, and mass of existing structures and how the permissive mixed-use bonus was being applied in the project. There was concern over whether the project was eligible for the mixed-use bonus when one of the proposed affordable housing concessions was to deviate from the building setback criteria required to be eligible for the bonus. At that time, the Commission directed staff to return with a resolution of denial. On May 4th, the applicant requested that the Planning Commission not act on the resolution of denial. The applicant requested to redesign the building and eliminate the concession for the setback and step backs adjacent to the residential properties to the north. At this meeting, the Commission agreed to review a revised project and tabled the matter until the applicant returned with a revised project. The original project was designed using an affordable housing concession to provide for building stepbacks different from that required in the mixed-use bonus standards. Following the Planning Commission review of the project, the applicant has worked with staff and redesigned the project, which eliminate the concession and include a building that is code compliant with regard to the setback to the adjacent residential zone. The minor revisions that have been incorporated into the project are the following. The building on the northerly elevation, which faces the residential zone, is now set back 25 feet on floors 1 through 3 and an additional 25 feet on floors 4 through 5. The structure located closest to the residential zoning district is limited to 35 feet in height for the first 3 stories. The required setback for this building adjacent to a residential zone is 10 feet. The proposed project is 20 feet away from the residential property lying to the north, which is more than double what is required. Additionally, the building is set back an additional 25 feet on floors 4 and 5 for a total of a 50-foot setback from the residential property line on the north. An entrance ramp to the subterranean parking garage along Sherbourne is covered and consists of metal framing, gypsum board, white stucco finish to match the building, and with a green roof. The elimination of rooftop decks. The patios on the 4th floor along the north side of the building include perimeter planter boxes planted with tall grasses for privacy screening between the units. And the project size has decreased approximately 3,000 square feet and decreased from 30 dwelling units to 26 dwelling units. The project has been constructed with, or the project will be constructed with 2 levels of subterranean parking with 63 parking spaces, which is the required number of parking spaces for this project. Overall, the project is well designed to its unique site configuration and location. The project is larger than its neighbors and relates to the adjacent buildings with strategically designed massing. The massing is broken into 2 buildings connected by open-air bridges with a public passageway through the site. In these ways, the project respects the urban context while enhancing the design district. There are other buildings along Beverly with multiple stories, specifically 2 medical buildings that are 4 and 5 stories in height at 8733 and 8737 Beverly Boulevard, which are 4 properties to the west, and directly to the south of Beverly are multiple Cedar Sinai buildings that are 9+ stories. Some concerns have been raised from commissioners and neighbors, so I have a few conditions that I would like to add and or revise to the resolutions based on those concerns. Condition 8.11, I would like to add that a root barrier be required for the perimeter bamboo privacy hedge. Condition 8.15 indicates the removal of an existing ficus tree and the planting of 3 new jacaranda trees. I would like to modify the condition to state that the 3rd tree would be at the city's discretion as to its location, in case during the plan check process 3 trees are unable to fit in the public right-of-way along Sherbourne. And conditions 9.2 and 11.15 should indicate the project is constructed with 63 parking spaces instead of 65. The proposed project requires 63, and that is what is provided. I would like to add a couple new conditions. Condition 6.18, that the construction during the excavation and grading phase must end at 6 p.m. daily. during allowed construction days to prohibit any nuisance to the adjacent restaurant patrons as well as adjacent residential neighbors. Normal construction ends at 7 p.m. And so we've pulled it back an hour. Condition 6.18 that the construction during the excavation and grading phase, I'm sorry, I just said that. Condition 15.3, the applicant shall verify and confirm the water table elevation as part of the final geotechnical review. Condition 11.19, that valet hours of operation shall end by 10 p.m. daily. The people that are using the valet area will be patrons of this building, office use, retail use, and gallery use, so we don't anticipate that they would go past 10 o'clock daily. And also a new condition, 11.20, that the valet shall only be utilized by patrons of the subject building, which means that patrons from, Granville or other locations would not be able to use the subject valet. The city's urban designer, environmental consultants that prepared the mitigated negative declaration and traffic study and applicant are available if you have any concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. Does the commission have any questions at this time of staff on this item before we?
Disclosures.
Seeing none, how about if we make some disclosures before we go beyond this? Anybody? Lynn?
I talked to the applicant's representative about the items on the agenda and also with the owners of an adjacent property.
Thank you.
I met with the applicants, no, sorry, I didn't meet. We had a phone conversation with the applicant's representative and one of the adjacent property owners, and everything we discussed is contained in the staff report.
Thank you. Commissioner?
I met with the applicant's representative about a month and a half ago. We discussed the project.
Okay.
I met with the applicant's representative as well as the adjacent property owners, and I visited the site.
Thank you.
I met with the applicant's representatives and two of the adjacent property owners and also visited the site.
I'm sorry, I forgot to mention I visited the site.
Thank you. I also had a phone conversation with the applicant's representative and spoke on the phone, and also spoke with the owners of the adjacent property where the Granville restaurant is located, at all times about items that were subject to the staff report. Okay, so we'll go forward then. We'd ask the applicant or the applicant's representative to come forward. Again, you have 10 minutes for your presentation, and thank you.
Good evening, Honorable Commissioners. Todd Elliott on behalf of the applicant, 8711 Beverly Boulevard Properties, LLC, practicing law at 626 Wilshire Boulevard in Los Angeles. Thank you for the opportunity to return to the Commission this evening. I know some of you are new, and I'll try to give you some background as the staff did a good job in doing so, but I'll repeat a few of those things. We appeared before this commission on April 6, 2017, presenting a larger project with 30 units and requesting a concession under the state density bonus law to set the project back from the northerly residential line 22 feet versus 25 feet. The commission eventually voted to allow us to return with a revised project and implicitly noted that we should try to meet the code requirements of the city's general plan and zoning code. Moreover, we noted from comments of the commission and neighbors that we needed to undertake more outreach with the area residents and property owners. Our process was to first meet with the city's urban designer and discuss revising the project. Next, we conducted a series of meetings, talks, and information gathering to determine if residents, property owners, tenants preferred that we lower the height of the building to only 4 stories or affect greater setbacks from the residential area to the north. Almost universally, with one exception, we were told we want breathing room. We don't want a 10-foot setback from the northern property line. We'd like you to set it back as far as you can. So The direction that we almost universally received was we could live with 5 stories, but we don't want 4 stories or 5 stories right next to us. And with that in mind, we set Lorcan O'Herlihy loose with trying to revise the project to comply with code. We discovered that we'd have to lose some of the units to do that, but we could accommodate the neighboring residents in particular by setting the project back 25 feet for the first 35 feet and then another 25 feet and achieving 5 stories only in the middle of the project and on the Beverly side. What was really important is that we looked at context, and we tried to look at the style, height, and massing of buildings nearby. And because the style and massing are so eclectic, really what drove us to consider was the height of various buildings. The residential to the north is predominantly 1 and 2 stories. Along Beverly Boulevard, as staff mentioned, there's structures ranging from 1 to 9 stories. There are a couple of medical buildings that are 4 and 5 stories, or about 50 to 55 feet high. And there's, of course, the Beverly Center and other taller buildings. But predominantly in that area, the average is 4 or 5, and of course, Cedars is 8 and 9 stories across the street. So that is how we began to look at context, and compatibility was to achieve that compatibility by buffering away from the neighbors to the north and creating similar height to what is at Beverly Boulevard currently. The staff pointed out new changes to the project, but I just want to reiterate what those changes are. The reduction of the size of the project loses 4 units, goes from 30 to 26 units. I had extensive conversations, and I was appreciative of those conversations with Mr. Giesbrecht from West Hollywood West about not having rooftop uses, and the patios on the 3rd floor, on the roof of the 3rd floor that serve the 4th, 5th floor 2-story units are truly patios and not roof decks. Enclosing the garage entrance with a green rooftop, and we also agreed, which is something staff will want to take note of, to line the interior of that garage entrance with acoustablock lining so that it further is soundproofed. All of the courtyard space is now at the ground floor, not on the roof. The facade has changed, pushing the height of the rear building to the middle of the site instead of spreading it across the entire site. We now call this project Passageways because we feel it quietly connects Sherbourne Drive, a residential street, to busy Beverly Boulevard. Is the technical now working? Oh, it is. Good. So you can see that our proposed massing, if we had a 4-story building closer to the residential, would only leave a 10-foot opening, and that was not desired. We wanted to create as much breathing room from the northern part of the property as possible. This gives you an indication, and I can't tell with the lights how well you can see, but we're happy to make the renderings as easy to see, or maybe the technical people will turn down the lights a little bit. You will see that we have integrated the, you really can't see it in this picture, but we've cut the, there you can see it better. We've cut the massing way back on the 4th and 5th floors to the middle of the building. We also worked on the facade of the Beverly Boulevard facade to make the building, to give it a little bit more oomph. And that was something that we heard at design review, that we wanted to see something a little bit more exciting, and I think we have achieved that. This is the passageway that takes you from Sherborne and out to Beverly Boulevard. Finally, we have, in this iteration, determined that we really want to activate Beverly Boulevard and create a passageway from Sherborne onto Beverly Boulevard. You're seeing art that is reflective of bicycles, and we have determined that we want to do on-site art, bicycle-themed, with the hopes that this becomes one of the many projects in West Hollywood that will use a QR code to tell people where bicycles can be found, where the bike lanes are, and to get people not just driving, but not just walking, but using bikes as well. With regard to the landscaping, I had an extensive discussion with Commissioner Hoopengardner, and staff brought up the 3 jacaranda trees. We're happy to supply them. We want to work with the Public Works Department to figure out if 2 or 3 serves the street best. We certainly agree that the bamboo at the north will be in a container, and while it may grow 30 to 35 feet high, it is clumping and it must be potted to prevent it from being spread. The electrical lines will be placed underground. That's a requirement of SCE and a requirement of the city. And with regard to the valet, yes, we agree. We don't want that to be noisy for our residents or anyone else. So with regard to the conditions that staff proposed, we accept those conditions. Those are reasonable, and we would be happy to have them added to the conditions of approval. In conclusion, this project now meets all of the city's requirements under the general plan and the zoning code, and we feel it's vastly improved. It's a little bit smaller, but it's now a better project, and we respectfully request your support for the project. Our architect team and landscape team are here to answer any technical questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. Any questions by any commissioners at this time? No? Okay. Thank you very much. We'll now open this to the public. We have several speakers. Again, when you come to the podium and your name is called, please come forward, state your name, full name, and your city of residence. You will have 3 minutes. We're not seeing the timer up on the screen, is that correct? But we are seeing it up here on our monitors, and our commission secretary is going to be in charge of letting you know when your time is up.
Yes, yeah, we're going to reset the system when we take a break. So,
all right, thank you. First speaker is Manny Rodriguez, followed by Wesley Bridle. Did I skip one? Excuse me, Manny, you're going to be number 2. Matt, I'm sorry, for some reason Amanda Hyde. Thank you. Sorry, Amanda. That's okay. Oh, there she is.
Good evening. My name is Amanda Smash Hyde, and I am a resident of West Hollywood. I'm also a business owner in West Hollywood. I just wanted to quickly touch on some points with this project. First of all, I fully support staff recommendation. And I think that the architectural design of this building is actually really beautiful. I think that it's different than ones that I've seen before in the neighborhood. I like that the architecture design for the project is 25 feet away, even though it could be 10. So I like that. I also like that there's 90 points in the green project and it meets all the required zoning codes, including parking, and that it has enough parking for all the residents and commercial businesses on site, which is really important in this area, and I know it's usually one of the major complaints. I think the changes to the project appear to be a benefit to the neighbors. I think that the architect's been very thoughtful in that. I also noticed that there's covered garage parking now, which is also really good for the neighbors. And the biggest thing for me is I'm a huge advocate for creating housing in the state of California, and especially here in West Hollywood. We are in the nation's biggest housing crisis in California, and I love projects where there wasn't housing and now there is housing. And we need more projects like this. Nobody's being displaced. It's creative. It's thoughtful to the neighbors around. I actually would prefer that it was the original, where more people would have gotten the benefit of living in this city. So anything like this, and I love that there's also affordable. I mean, in my dream world, I wish there was more affordable, but what are you gonna do? But I strongly support this project because, again, nobody's being displaced. It's where there wasn't housing and now there will be housing. So thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
Manny Rodriguez, followed by Wesley Bridle.
Hello, Commissioners. Manny Rodriguez, West Hollywood. This project has addressed and made right everything that was originally wrong about it. It has reimagined itself into the kind of building that this city intended to be on Beverly Boulevard. It respects the established residential neighborhoods to its north, and it offers much-needed market and sustainable affordable housing. It creatively now does all this within a challenging envelope and with much consideration. Last April's Planning Commission meeting was one of the most fascinating meetings I've ever watched. I still don't completely understand it, but I can tell that what was debated at that meeting may be a turning point for this city and this commission. I hope all the new commissioners watch that meeting because it will tell you about fairness. It will show you how to read between the lines, how to challenge conventional interpretations of bonuses and concessions, and how to encourage the building of projects that are useful and appropriate to their surroundings. I commend this developer for sticking with this project and making it right, the West Hollywood West Residents Association, and the individual residents who spoke up about this project originally. And most importantly, I commend former Commissioner Sheila Lightfoot for opening the door to a better project. I encourage your unanimous approval.
Thank you. Wesley Bridle, followed by Jonathan Anderson.
Thank you, Commissioners. Wesley Bridle, West Hollywood. Speaking as a private citizen, I just want to support staff's recommendation on this project. I feel, like Amanda said, any time that we can take a place where there's no housing now and add to the housing is always a bonus. But furthermore, in our live, work, and play city, I do feel that this building goes above and beyond to promote that, given the commitment to bicycling, creating the pedestrian passos, and stuff like that. And so I'm full support of this building, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Mr. Jonathan Anderson, followed by Hector Barbosa.
Hi, Jonathan Anderson. I'm a resident of West Hollywood. I as well support this project and encourage you guys to approve its moving forward. It's a very attractive building, and I respect that the planners have gone ahead and accommodated all the requests. You know, the fact that they've moved the spacing between the retail and the residential to accommodate the original complaints is very conscientious of what is needed to move this forward. You know, not to mention their ideas for encouraging environmental sustainability for a building like this, as well as, you know, low-income housing is. I think that speaks to what we're all hoping for as far as like the kind of, you know, buildings we would want designed in our neighborhood. And I greatly appreciate the fact that you guys are willing to listen to allow this to move forward. And again, I support it. I approve, hope you approve it as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Barbosa, and followed by Elena Goldberg. Excuse me, that was Mr. Barbosa.
Good evening to everyone. My name is Hector Barbosa. I'm here to support this project. I have a personal stake at it because I've been living here for 9 years, and in the last couple of years, I've had a lot of friends stay, you know, at my place because they can't find somewhere, you know, to live because of changes in their life. And over these last 2 years, housing in West Hollywood, just like in the rest of LA, and like the young lady said earlier in California, it hasn't been as easy as it used to be. So anytime that we hear something that there's going to be affordable housing or any type of housing, it's always something that I'm happy about. Seeing the project and from the physical standpoint, it's not only a beautiful project, but it's just a beautiful building. But it's also something that is much needed in West Hollywood. Anything that enhances the city is always a plus in my view. Also something about parking, and that is that there was a fear, and some years ago when I first moved to West Hollywood, that there wouldn't be enough parking for a lot of people, under different circumstances. But a lot of changes have taken place over these last 9 years, and more people are not only using bicycles. That's another thing I love about this project, that they're enhancing that. But also that a lot of people also, stay home and they work, and there's changes that somehow solve a lot of the issues that, sometimes we're concerned with. And the one thing to always remember is that we do fear change in general, but somehow we always adapt to those changes. And I think that with the construction of this building and what it's going to do to the city, it's going to be more of an enhancement, more of a benefit to the community in terms of retail, in terms of housing, affordable housing. And I completely support this project. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Elena Goldberg, followed by Albert McCain.
Good evening, honorable commissioners. My name is Elena Goldenberg. I'm a 24 years resident of the city of West Hollywood. I love this city. And I'm here to support this project. I'm a big fan of affordable housing, and our city does a great job to bring more housing in for the people who really needs it. I'm happy that this project is going to have some affordable housing for a low income. It's not much, but it's something, and I really appreciate that it's going to be there. The project is very nice. I like it so much. It has a beautiful space. It has a garage. It has a very beautiful view. So I'm asking you to approve this project and to do the best job for our city, because we really need housing for different people, the people who has income and people who doesn't have an income. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Mr. McCain, followed by Howard Meltzer.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm totally against this project. I'm the closest resident. I like what they've done, but it's just too big. We all want affordable housing. We all, want nice places to live, but this is just the wrong address for this size of property. It's just too big. If you walk 5 minutes down the street, you'll see all the traffic that's on Beverly Boulevard. If I drove my car here, it would have took me 10 minutes to get here. Taking my bike, I got here quicker because there's so much traffic. And as you know, they're going to expand Beverly Boulevard so much they're going to expand it that Granville is losing all their outdoor seats that were approved before they built the place. And if they're already planning to widen the street, there's so much traffic, this is just the wrong time for this size of building. It's just too big. It will just change the whole neighborhood, and totally against it. And if you know my property, I have a 4-car garage, and I wrote love on my garages because I love West Hollywood, and I know you have the power and you will do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Howard Meltzer, followed by Faith Ginsburg.
Hi, I'm Howard Meltzer. I live on Bonner Drive in West Hollywood, and my bedroom will be facing the proposed project. And a couple of things I want to say is that I'm totally not against change. I grew up in New York City and lived in Manhattan for 20 years before I moved here. And I think the building could be wonderful. I appreciate the changes you've made and how it's been scaled back. I have several concerns. My first question, which I didn't see in the paperwork, is what are these said affordable housing rates? I heard my neighbors, Amanda, Manny, Wesley, Jonathan, and Hector, being so excited about this building being built. What are the rents of this building? Why are they so excited about a building they have no idea if they could possibly afford to live in? My questions about are the traffic on Shearborn and how incredibly dense the traffic is right now. If you see a delivery at Granville and someone pulling into the parking lot at the bank, traffic stops. What has the traffic study been made? Are we aware, since the Granville's open, the amount of traffic that's been coming to the neighborhood? And a huge question, which I need to ask, is the effect on ways in our neighborhood. Have you, Lynn, David, Sue, John, Adam, and Rodrigo gone to the site at different times of the day? And if you could assure me you have seen the traffic and you're fine with it, and you're fine with how people are using Shearborn and Bonner, like the Autobahn, charging down the street, and you're fine with more cars coming, and you've all visited that, and you could vote in good conscience that you know there'll be absolutely no traffic problems, no fatalities. You've been there and you could do that, well then vote your conscience. If you have not all visited the project and gone several times during the day, then I don't know how you could possibly vote yes. Thank you.
Faith Ginsburg, followed by Matt Hector.
I'm going to read this because I'm a lousy public speaker.
State your name and city of
My
residence.
name's Faith Ginsburg. I live in West Hollywood.
Thank you.
Okay, now I'm going to read this. My name is Faith Ginsburg. I live on Bonner Drive, directly north of the proposed project. I would like to thank the developer for slightly scaling back the building. The new design encroaches less on my bedroom window, so I appreciate that. I've lived on Bonner for over 12 years. I walk my dog 4 times a day and I work at home, so I might spend a little more time out in the neighborhood than the average resident. When I'm out, I see something different than what a traffic study from 2015 with projections for 2018 tells you. I see distracted drivers trying to escape bumper-to-bumper traffic on Beverly Boulevard. A lot of times they're speeding, and they use Bonner Drive, which is a very small street, and Shearborn Drive as cut-throughs. At about 1 p.m. today, I was out walking my dog. I was in the crosswalk at Shearborn and Rosewood when the car at the stop sign abruptly decided to drive ahead and missed me and my dog by a couple of feet. I yelled loudly, and fortunately he stopped. I'm telling you this because I see these types of incidents every day in the neighborhood. Honestly, I've lost track of how many times it's happened to me. Parking is at a premium on Bonner and Shearborn. People who work in the neighborhood use 1-seat permits to park on Bonner and Shearborn during the day. Supposedly, the residents of the new building will not be entitled to 1-hour parking permits. As I understand it, though, each unit will be entitled to 50 day passes annually. So multiply that by 26 units, and that equals 1,300 day passes. Where are those cars going to park? There's going to be one driveway for this project located on Shearborn. The driveway for the proposed project is about a football field or so north of Beverly Boulevard on Shearborn. Do we really think that a driveway that's going to be operating 24/7 will not increase traffic and noise? And yes, I heard that cars exiting the driveway will only be allowed to turn right towards Beverly rather than left on Shearborn. That's nice in theory, but how exactly is that going to be enforced? I'm all for affordable housing, but shoehorning 9,400 square feet of commercial space with 26 apartments and 2 levels of underground parking into a mostly residential neighborhood is a bad idea, and more importantly, a potential safety hazard for everyone in the area. I hope we're not back here in a couple of years discussing traffic calming measures, but I think we will be. Thanks for your time.
I would ask that people in the audience not applaud. We all understand there's people on both sides of the issue. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Matthew Hector, and my business partner Chris Brennan and I own the restaurant for Lane, which is essentially kind of tucked into 2 sides of the proposed project. So you could see we're just to the left of the Beverly side. Yeah, so when we took over Dominic's a few years ago, there was actually no tenant at what is currently now Granville. And the 2 buildings, well, sort of northwest of us, were also empty at the time, and more or less they still continue to be. So we were obviously excited when Granville came in and made that corner nice, because it hadn't been for some time. And we obviously had a lot of concerns about this project, as it's going to impact us almost daily. And but the owner of the property has actually reached out to us on several occasions. We've had several meetings with him, as has the owner of our business, the property owner. And I think the only thing that I could say is he's been very forthcoming, very accommodating, and we actually went from being pretty scared about this project to being really excited about it and welcoming it, and we think it's going to be great for the neighborhood and great for us. And we appreciate we appreciate his cooperation, and we support this. Thank you.
Next speaker is Brian Roscom, and then following with Daniel Collins.
Good evening. My name is Brian Roscom. I live in LA. My husband and I bought our house on Bonner Drive in 1989, where we lived until '98 when we moved a mile away to LA, and we continued to invest in Bonner as our little nest egg. So we are very lucky to own the 4-unit building directly behind this project at 8704 and 06, and my tenants are Faith and Howard, who spoke earlier. We also own a 2-house duplex next door to the 4-unit, our original house at 8712, and we own a house across the street. And so I've been lucky to be part of Bonner for 28 years, I guess. Let me just quickly thank, in absentia, Commissioner Lightfoot from the last meeting, because she was the one who kind of figured out what was wrong with the project. So thank you to her, but I really will also say thank you to Todd Elliott, to the developer, who after that really made a concerted effort to reach out, to listen. They provided the neighbors with 2 proposals, and they're correct. I mean, I supported the proposal that's here amongst those choices. I think everybody else did. So if, like as my tenants and some of the other residents indicated, if you have the power to make this project smaller, that's lovely, but I don't think you really do. I think a lot of the concern here is about issues relating to zoning, what the affordable housing bonuses, how they impact us, what the mixed-use bonuses are. But if I've understood correctly, that basically this project now fits in the legal framework of zoning and entitlements, then I will say that within that framework, because I would love to see a smaller project, so I'm going to hold that, but within this framework, I think this is a good project. The developer listened, they have pulled back. You know, the garage cover, they pretty much did everything. I have a couple of requests, though. I couldn't be up here without. And they're fairly minor, I think, but we'll see what they think. And that would be, the bamboo is great on the side wall, so thank you. The valet limit that was proposed to 11, great, thank you. Confirming that these residents don't get a 1-hour permit or guest passes that are permanent. The 2 issues I wanted to ask about both relate to the new terraces. What's happening now is on the roof of the 3rd floor, there are 4 2-story units. Each of those units will have a large terrace going out onto the roof. Each terrace is going to be about 25 by 25 or bigger. So they're all 625 square feet or more. So they're actually larger than most of the apartments in the building, if I've measured correctly. Regardless, they're big, 25 by 28, 31 by 25. So what I'm asking for is, if ideally, scale them back. But I don't think that that's going to be something the developer wants to do. So as an alternative, if we can't move them back, say 10 feet, so they don't hang out all the way to the edge of the roof so people are out peering down into my tenants' windows, and I know there's a proposal to put grass, but...
Your time is up. 3 minutes is up.
Okay.
Thank you.
Then if you could limit hours of operation and limit the noise, just...
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
Daniel Collins, followed by Harlan Allen.
Hi, my name is Dan Collins. I'm a resident of West Hollywood. I am a renter. I am a renter of a rent-stabilized unit. I spoke at the last hearing in April. I gave my approval of that project, that building, and I'd like to continue to do that tonight. I like the current changes, and most of my points have truly been made, and I know you guys have a long night, but my feeling is just that we need more housing here. This would add 26 units. It's an infill project, and there'd be some low-income units as well. So I just really want you to approve some more local housing. Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Thank you. Harlan Allen, followed by Richard Giesbert.
Harlan Allen, a West Hollywood resident. Definitely improve this project. Absolutely think it's wonderful. It's pretty much a parking lot. I've gone by that, I guess it was a bar. I never felt too comfortable going by it. I was like, I've never gone in there. Will not be displacing anybody, so that's absolutely wonderful. Stuff like this adds to the housing stock, which is something we absolutely need. And of course, there will be some affordable housing like most people here. I'm a renter myself, and I definitely want more affordable housing. But at this point, that's what we're looking at. But the thing that I'm actually excited about, and I was trying to think, what does this remind me of when I was looking at it? And I was in Amsterdam about a year ago, and they had the Palace of Justice, went by on a boat, and I was like, that's what this sort of reminds me of. And I'm really in love with that type of architecture. In this case, it looks like they've taken the windows and not made them congruent, which is really very popular in Amsterdam for historic reasons because everything used to shift. And in a very sort of eclectic area like that corner, architecture like this, I think brings that in. As you know, the buildings behind it are much taller and they have a flat surface, and it's kind of orderly. And this kind of brings that in. The furthest building looks like it sort of is toggled out into the sea of cars and then taken in by the walkway. So that's very unique. I have not seen that even over at the Palace of Justice in Amsterdam. So for me, this is, when I first saw it, I was like, oh my gosh, what do we have here? But within that, Amsterdam, as much of the Netherlands, is a very walkable area and very bikeable. So I'm glad they're, sticking with the themes of bikeability. But walkability in this city is actually, I walk and I bike and I use public transportation, not a big car driver. And I don't notice the traffic as much, okay? This city, you can pretty much walk in about an hour from stem to stern, and this would be I think the theme for this building and the rest of Hollywood, West Hollywood moving forward. And this is something we definitely need to embrace. If we become a more walkable city, we can possibly deal with some of the traffic problems that we have right now. I don't think it's going to increase because people will be actually there. And they'll hopefully, get to work in the area. Thank you very much for listening, and I definitely approve this design and the intent of this building.
Thank you for your comments. Richard Giesbert, followed by Ryan Welch.
Richard Giesbret, President of West Hollywood West Residents Association and resident of West Hollywood. I'd like to acknowledge that the owner and his representative, Todd Elliott, cooperated with us in rectifying some problematic aspects of the project. Importantly, they removed the roof decks and enclosed the driveway ramp, substantially reducing unwanted disturbance to the neighborhood, both to the north and to the future potential neighborhood to the east. There are some additional inexpensive things that might be done to further the reduction of noise. The Commission might consider these points. Limiting the use of amplified music or voice on the terraces, reducing the size of the terraces, thereby nudging the use towards smaller groups, considering the light trespass issues onto the neighborhood and the post-occupancy light trespass issues that might obtain. They might also consider the north wall, which serves as a soundboard reflecting all noise from all terraces to the neighborhood. You might also extend the driveway ramp enclosure another 5 feet or so to contain noise at the top of the ramp from motor noise, tire noise at the inflection point of the ramp. I appreciate your attention to the issues of, and the owner's attention to the issues of noise disturbance, because problems remain in place for decades. It can only it'll affect the residential neighborhoods for decades and degrade the city in general. I would also encourage a better review process to improve the outcomes. An example would be establishing working rules for the design of driveway ramp enclosures, establishing standards for their acoustical attenuation, address matters of the materials, their permanency, their efficacy, and to have verifiable results. West Hollywood West remains concerned about the community development process and the standards of review over roof decks, as I've mentioned, terraces, driveway ramps, and lots of other sources of noise disturbance, such as mechanical units and the like. So I would encourage you to comment to the department or comment to the staff about these matters generally and specifically on this project.
Thank you.
Your
time is up, sir.
We'd also like to thank Sheila Lightfoot
Thank
for
you.
her service and specifically attentiveness to the planning ordinance.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ryan Welch, followed by Richard Wolf.
Good evening. Ryan Welch, 416 North Doheny, resident of West Hollywood for 13 years. I live just a short distance from the project. When I had seen the design for this project back in April, I came and spoke in favor of it because I thought it was just incredibly innovative. And when it got denied, and then I was just going to Granville this last weekend and walked past the site and saw the rendering of the revised project and saw that there was going to be another planning commission hearing considering the revised project. I was extremely excited because, and then to see what they had done by, cutting back some of the top and doing a setback and then putting the garden on the top of that floor, that they were able to revise this design to accommodate the neighborhood without losing the integrity of what the architects were looking to do, which is something that you usually don't see in small projects like this. You see it in big projects, huge, expensive projects, to do something that's this out of the ordinary and makes such great use of the space and really has a lot of architectural integrity. It's not something that, that you see on a regular basis, especially not around here in our neighborhood. You're used to seeing box buildings, and this is interesting. It makes great use of the space and is a beautiful, I would, love to be walking by this building all the time. So, yeah, I want to support staff recommendation of approving this, and I would love to see this in that space, a parking lot and a business that is not really. I'd never been in that with the bar or whatever it is. So yeah, I just think it's remarkable. I think it would be a great addition to the neighborhood. I love the fact that they were able to address concerns in the neighborhood without losing the integrity of the design that they were going for. So thank you very much. Have a great night.
Thank you for your comments. Richard Wolf, followed by Cynthia Blatt.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Richard Wolf. I reside in Westlake Village. We are the owners, the landlords of the Granville property, which is adjacent to the proposed development. We've owned the property since 1975 as a family and have always been cognizant of being a good neighbor in West Hollywood and conscious of the restaurant that we put in. We had a lot of options and we chose to select Granville. We're still not supportive of the project as designed, although we're appreciative of the developer's efforts to mitigate some of the concerns that were presented by the community earlier this year, primarily for a few factors. One, it's simply overbearing and incongruent with the neighborhood, although under the code, I think everyone recognizes that with the mixed use as well as affordable housing, they are allowed to go up to 5 stories, but that's still an issue just in terms of the congruency of the neighborhood. If the proposed project is approved, however, we would respectfully request a few items. First, the property resides on a very shallow water table. For those of you that may or may not know, the environmental impact report was prepared a few years ago, subsequent to approximately 5 years of drought conditions. And this past year, we had significant rainfall, and water tables do fluctuate as rainfall fluctuates. So we would request and encourage that a new EIR report be conducted. In that report as well, there were very few borings that were drilled down into the water table. I have extensive real estate development experience, and I'm aware that you need to drill down more than 2 or 3 borings in order to get a good sense of the water table. We also would request that if construction commences with 2 stories underground, that reinforcement and it stabilizes the actual 2 stories of underground parking adjacent to our property and adjacent to the apartment buildings. We also would request some construction mitigation, in particular noise, parking for construction vehicles in the area given the parking concerns. And we also would request that a new traffic study be conducted since Granville opened up just this year and traffic patterns have changed in the neighborhood. Lastly, given that the building abuts our restaurant and there's open air dining, we would request that during the construction period, although we're appreciative of the condition that was augmented, we would request that excavation and grading not take place after 5 p.m. Also that noise and dust control be enhanced to prevent that from penetrating the open air dining area. Thank you for your consideration. Appreciate it.
Thank you for your comments. Cynthia Blatt. You'll be our last speaker, Ms. Blatt.
Hi.
Hi.
Cynthia Blatt, West Hollywood. Good evening. I've spent the last 25 years working with homeless populations and creating affordable housing. First at the VA, where I worked with trauma, combat-related disorders and finding supportive housing that was effective because it included services. At my 17 years at HUD, where I am currently employed, I've worked to help cities, counties, and nonprofit agencies find the funding to develop and build affordable housing. In the city of West Hollywood, we have about 18 to 20,000 people per square mile. This is the very definition of density. People talked about how much we need to increase the housing stock. Well, we do need to increase affordable housing stock, but at $3,500 to $4,300 a month rent for 1-bedroom apartments and $5,000 to $5,600 a month for 2-bedroom apartments, what we're doing is we're creating wealthy housing stock. There is no housing shortage for the wealthy. There is, however, an affordable housing shortage. And we are also increasingly violating our general plan by ignoring compatibility with the neighborhoods. I'm not in favor of yet one more large project intruding into the quiet, peaceful residential neighborhood that was one of the neighborhoods that used to define this city. There are places in the city that a project of this size could be built. And when I hear people get up and say, I'm so excited about this because there's affordable housing in it, I wonder, if there's not a little hypocrisy in there. I saw nobody complaining when the Center for Early Education destroyed an entire apartment building of affordable housing and paid absolutely no public benefit in any way, shape, or form, and no one got up and said anything about that. Also, a school where less than 1/10 of 1% of the students are West Hollywood students. So overall, there was absolutely no benefit to the city of West Hollywood except the destruction of more affordable housing. So we're not being a creative city. We're not building affordable housing. We're normalizing unacceptable and really bad by saying, oh, thank you for making these changes and concessions, so that what we're doing is we're normalizing it to bad. Well, it's bad. It's not horrible, so we should be okay with it. I urge the city to think about this trend of shoehorning these enormous, comparatively enormous projects into every corner of quiet residential neighborhoods and the effect that it has on the traffic, on the residents of the neighborhoods, on even the green space, which we're destroying at an alarming rate. Now, I know that this isn't the kind of argument that you guys are going to be particularly favorable to, because we're not... Okay, thank you, John.
Thank you.
Although I think Sue Buckner was supposed to be the one that called time.
No, I asked him to.
I didn't say a word, Cynthia.
Yeah. Thank you. We have, excuse me, one more, Sherry Stark. Would you come forward? Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Sherry Stark, and my husband and I have lived on Bonner for 24 years now, I think. I want to also complain about the size. There are so many of these meetings, it's hard to keep track. We've gone to all of them down to the 8,900 to try to do that, and I just kind of got exhausted, frankly, of the process of trying to keep our neighborhood livable. The points that I wanted to make are I think it's duplicitous to compare the Beverly Center and Cedars-Sinai as being indicative of what our neighborhood is. We're a street away, at least, from that. The ones that are on Beverly that are tall, there's a parking lot, a ground parking lot, and then a setback all the way to Bonner of buffer. And those were put in, and we're grateful for them. I hope that that buffer will stay, because those huge buildings have, like I say, at least a half a block, if not 3/4 of a block buffer between them and the residents. This, comparing this to that, which is going to go right up to the apartment buildings, or 20 feet is still not enough of a buffer, and I want to protest it. I also think that Sherborne with the banks, as another resident or two have said, is already congested. It already is maxed out to be able to use. Adding this much more office space and residents there is just ludicrous. I don't know, you say you've been to the site, but I don't think you've driven it or gone to the site during the day, perhaps. And it is even the same at night. There's nightclubs. The space, the Leica, has parties once in a while, and they're relatively civilized, but we live right next to them, and the parking lot is now being used. The parking lot on the corner of Beverly and Bonner is now being used at night for valet. So it's every square inch of the neighborhood is congested and almost unlivable as it is now. Adding this huge building inside of it is crazy. Even across the street by Cedars-Sinai or by the Beverly Center with a buffer of a street would be conceivable, but right next to us already having terrible traffic and not to mention the parking, but you say it'll only be holidays, I guess, where those people will have visitors. I don't see how you consider it. I understand the bonus of having affordable housing, but a few affordable housing units in this is not enough. And everybody has complimented the developers for making concessions, but if the original proposal is already so out of character with the neighborhood that making a few concessions is the best we can get, maybe legally you're okay with it, but the spirit of the neighborhood is being trespassed. I want to protest it. Thank you
so much. There are no other public speakers at this time, so I'm going to ask if the applicant would like to come forward to rebut some of the comments that they heard from public.
Thank you, Commissioners. First of all, I'd like to thank everyone in the public, whether you support or oppose the project, for coming forward to speak. I don't need to address the people who support the project. We thank them. I will talk about a few of the comments that were made. People asked what would the rents be for the affordable and moderate units. Off the top of my head, I'm not, wouldn't hold me to exact numbers, but approximately $600 a month for the very low income units and $900 a month for the moderate income units. With regard to traffic, a proper study was done at our request. Originally, staff said this doesn't require a traffic study, but we wanted to make sure. And I have been doing work in this community for over 25 years and can remember when I was a business license commissioner and there was Jerry's Deli, that the residents were very upset about the 24-hour deli and the amount of traffic coming in and out of what was then a parking lot and is now still a parking lot which could be an off-site parking lot or a parking lot for restaurant uses. So I firmly believe that knowing the history, this is a better solution traffic-wise to have residents and retail space and office space than a nightclub and an open-air parking lot. With regard to the requests of Mr. Giesbrecht, we appreciate his diligence in asking about amplified music. Please know this will be an apartment building, even though different parts of it may be mapped for financing purposes. That means in California, 16 units plus, you have an on-site manager. We don't want anybody creating noise disturbances any more than folks in West Hollywood West because we want our tenants who are paying rent to be pleased with their accommodation. With regard to Mr. Wolf's comments, we've already agreed to have the geotechnical report re-reviewed, and that's required by the building department. It will be a construction mitigation plan required as part of the project, and the excavation to end at 5:00 p.m. I really think that that's something that would be a little bit early. I think we need to err on the side of the residents. At 6:00 p.m. would be reasonable because they want to see this project get done, and they want to see it get done as quickly as possible. Lastly, I appreciate Mrs. Stark's comment that she doesn't want a project that is set only 20 feet back. This project is set 25 feet back. I don't have, I guess, control anymore. The actual setback requirement, if we were to, if we had lowered the project and put all of the massing over 4 stories, would have been 10 feet. And talking to all of the neighbors, we heard that we don't want that. We want breathing space. So we are trying to be respectful and give as much breathing space as possible. And I think that is the benefit that everyone wants to see, that is not just saying I don't want a project, but saying I want a project that is the best project that we can do. So with that, I respectfully request your approval of the project. We're happy to answer any questions that you may have. And thank you again for your time.
Thank you. Your time is up. And do I have any questions from commissioners to the applicant?
I have one.
Okay, thank you, Mr.
When we spoke on the phone, we discussed sound attenuation on the tunnel, the entrance to the valet and the garage. And you mentioned a specific substance that I think you had spoken to Mr. Giesbrecht about that you would be willing to use to further attenuate the sound in that area. Would you be okay with including that in the...
As a condition, yes.
Okay.
The material, and you could put, staff could write in that the lining of the garage would be lined with acoustablock lining. That's a sound deadening material, or like kind. In that garage,
the ramp entrance.
Ramp entrance. That would be a condition. We told Mr. Giesbrecht we would do that, and we're happy to have it as a condition.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay. We're good right now. Thank you very much. We might have to have you come back, though. We'll see. I'm going to leave the public hearing open, and we're going to go ahead and deliberate and see how it goes. So, go ahead, John.
I think that the applicant has made tremendous steps forward in making this project so much better than it was when it was presented last April. To those people who came and acknowledged that, I think it shows that the public is grateful for projects like this that provide public benefits in additional housing of market rate and additional affordable housing. And affordable housing, yes, 4 units is not going to solve the problem, but you take it a step at a time. And the city has always had a requirement for affordable housing as part of granting entitlements to any project of this size or even smaller. And this is how we make inroads into providing affordable housing. And West Hollywood is one of the most progressive and forward cities in the state of California, and if not in the country, in making these steps and these inroads and this progress toward providing affordable housing for those people that absolutely need it. I thank also those people who acknowledge Sheila Lightfoot's contribution toward not only this particular project and making it move forward, but in the contribution that she made in her several years on this commission. She made a great contribution, and I'm glad it's acknowledged and appreciated. The individual complaints and constructive criticism items that a lot of people brought forward, I'm sure will be taken into consideration by the applicants as they go forward in their construction phase, and that the mitigation phase will reflect their reasonable requests and the responsibility that we have to adequately mitigate construction. I think, as I said, that it's a beautiful project. It doesn't necessarily fit our standard concept of mixed use, where we think of that as retail on the ground floor and the housing vertically, directly on top of it. This has retail funding on Beverly, and it has residential going back into Sherborne and Bonner, or toward Sherborne and Bonner. It's the quality of the work architecturally is sensational, as I believe Mr. O'Herlihy's work is overall, and I think a project has been attained that is simply the best kind of a project it could be to add to what we need in this city. It has the beauty, and unfortunately for some of the neighbors who are more encroached upon than they were before, We again have to realize that we live in the second largest city in the United States. We're not yet New York, but you know, we live here knowing that we could live in the middle of Arizona or the middle of Kansas and have more space around us. We all have choices. So I think the applicants have done a wonderful job, and will continue with the supervision of the city's staff and with the supervision of the applicants' representatives who have, since April, done such an incredibly wonderful job in doing outreach to the public, that this project will hopefully be built in rapid form and will contribute to our housing and to the look of our community. The traffic is not going to get any better, and that's because we are the second largest urban community in the United States. We also have to understand that these apps that they put on our Bluetooth and on our phone, called Waze or something similar, that tell people to turn down Bonner Drive rather than stay on Beverly bumper to bumper, has contributed to it, and I don't know what to do about that, if anything. I was surprised last night when I was going down San Vicente and was planning on turning onto one of the side streets, Sherborne, and you couldn't get onto Sherborne because obviously Waze had told everybody that was the way to go. It's not the city's fault. So we're going to have to try to find some way to deal with that if, in fact, there is a way. But congratulations to the people that have worked on this project and brought it to this place and to this resolution with respect to its entitlement moving forward. And I intend to vote to move it forward. Thank you.
Anybody else want to make a comment?
I will.
Okay, Rogerio?
This is an unusual site which offers both challenges and opportunities in the hands of a talented designer. I think Lorcan and his team have done a good job of situating these buildings. They have let the circulation diagram erode the buildings like a river erodes mountains. Lorcan and his team have also responded to varying adjacent scales in a thoughtful way. 3 stories on the north side, which responds to its residential neighbors, and 5 stories on the south, which responds to the hospital and other buildings along Beverly Boulevard. Initially, I was concerned about the tunnel effect created by the passageway from Beverly through to Sherborne, but I'm happy to see that the space under the building is large and the building tips up at the corner as a nod informing its users, this is where you enter. A simple and expressive move in what is a carefully sculpted building. The incorporation of a small plaza plants the seed for adjacent future developments to tie into. It's a smart and bold move which creates a gathering space, something that doesn't exist in this area and which has proven successful in leftover spaces between buildings near the corner of Melrose and La Cienega, where Cycle House and Alfred are located, and behind H&M on Sunset Plaza. Lorcan, Todd, and I met several weeks ago to review this project. At that point, it was still evolving, and I felt the building looked stripped. However, it is clear that Lorcan and his team have continued to develop this project into a carefully crafted building that responds to its site conditions and offers new opportunities for this neighborhood. It's a statement building that doesn't scream and sets a new standard on a street that has less than inspiring architecture. Approving this building is a bold move, and I encourage fellow commissioners to approve this project. We need more groundbreaking projects.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions first. Condition 11.13 says that in a year's time, the community development director will be able to review this project and potentially move the valet to the street as opposed to inside. Is that correct? Am I reading that right?
That is correct.
Okay, that concerns me. What's the thought process behind that? Because I think that people are expecting the valet to be indoors, and I would hate to think that 1 year from now they feel like that it's been changed.
So we've worked with our transportation planner, with the applicant team, and the thought process behind that was that you would valet your car at Sherborne, and when you picked up your car, the valet operators would pull it out onto Sherborne, facing Beverly, facing south, so that it wouldn't impact the neighborhood, and the patrons would be driving out to Beverly and off of the residential streets. So that's what our staff came up with as to the best decision to keep to protect the neighborhood.
Okay, I'm gonna have to think about that. I appreciate that answer. Can you please just briefly mention the 3 conditions? Because I was doing chicken scratch here, and I can't even read my own notes. The 3 that you added this evening.
Oh, right. So the condition stated. On this. Sorry.
Thank you. I see them here. I think you said, I can read the numbers I wrote, 16.18, 6.18, 11.20, 11.19, and a 15.3. Although that's them. Thank you. Can you keep that up so like when I'm not talking I can actually read them? Because I can't do both at the same time. So thank you. I don't love this project, but as I look at it, I think that it checks all the boxes that we have discretion on. And I think that there are just a couple more things that are reflected in here, I believe. Again, I'll reserve your judgment until I can read them. But I think that there are some measures being taken that will accommodate most of the needs of the community that have been expressed. And when I was appointed to this commission, prior to being sworn in, I met with actually several former commissioners, as well as some of my now colleagues. And one of those commissioners I met with was former Commissioner Lightfoot, and asked advice on how to be a good commissioner. And she said, watch this meeting. And she handed me the notes for the meeting where this was heard in April. And so I learned a lot when I watched that meeting back in July, and then I watched it again in preparation for this meeting. And the concerns I heard at that time seem to have been more or less addressed by the applicant, and I appreciate that. So I might want to come back after I've read these, but I think that I appreciate the answers you've given me. But thank you.
Okay, just let me know if you want
Thank
to
you.
come back. Commissioner Oppenheimer?
Yes. I definitely would like to thank this developer for not only working within the letter of the code, but even the spirit of the code, and working with the community to make a better project. And I think we've talked about this in the past, and dialogue, sharing ideas is how to move towards better and better opportunities. I'd like to thank the staff for including all of these amendments and hearing all of the comments from all of the different parties and really incorporating them well in a way that I think addresses a lot of people's issues and solves, little things add up to big things. And I think you've done a nice job here of pulling that all together. And I think this is an example of how effective dialogue can result in a much better outcome. I have just a couple of things. I would agree with Commissioner Bass about the valet. That concerns me. While I absolutely understand the turning onto Sherborne southbound gets people moving out, because we've had this issue in a number of different projects, and people say, no left turn, and everybody goes, yeah, that's nice, left turn. And so that's an interesting option, but I have equal concerns about not recreating the catch problem with shutting off street, access and creating a further problem. So I don't know what the answer to that is, but I think we need to think that through. Regarding the water table and this item number 15.3, I'm not sure how to address this, but this, as written, says confirming the water table elevation. It doesn't really say what are the consequences once you've confirmed that. I kind of got out my Google Maps this afternoon and drew a line straight north, and it ends at 901 Hancock. And those of us who were around when that construction happened know that that project got put on hold with a big hole in the ground for the better part of 2 years. because they ran into the river, because that was a water pumping station at one point. And I would hate for this project to get stalled with a big hole in the ground surrounding these lovely restaurants and get in a similar situation, waiting for 2 years, working on mitigation to deal with the water table. I went through that, and then 2 projects north of me on West Knoll had similar problems where one guy almost went bankrupt because he hit water at like 5 feet and had to mitigate it, and he was practically in tears, and I felt really bad for him. So I'm looked to staff for recommendations about how you might tighten that or do something with it more than just, hey, determine what the level is. And I do like the mitigation and working on subsidence issues, because obviously you go down 2 feet, you're right up against these other buildings, and you hit water, you've got real subsidence issues. I will leave that up to building and engineering to address, because that's their specialty. But I really want to call it to your attention because it is something that we have experienced, and it's been very costly to a lot of people. And with that said, I too have been the victim of ways, especially when Santa Monica got shut down with all of the redo of all the lights. I all of a sudden had people doing 50 miles an hour past my house, almost got taken out by a car. So yes, do we need to do something about it? Can we solve it tonight? Nope. Is it something we should try and figure out a way to deal with? Yep. But I don't think that's going to be something we can handle tonight. With that, those are my comments.
No, everyone pretty much said everything I would say. I would just like to add that, I think the project is wonderfully designed. I think the applicant did a wonderful job responding to our discussion and the comments of the public at the previous Planning Commission meeting for this project. And I'm encouraged by the fact that, it's set back 25 feet on the ground floor and then an additional 25 feet on, I believe, above the 3rd floor, I believe, if that's correct. Mm-hmm. Kind of scaling it that way is substantially more sensitive to the neighborhood than the alternative which the applicant is entitled to. And it's always difficult when a project abuts, it happens to be on a commercial corridor, but also abuts a residential neighborhood. And I am cognizant and receptive of the concerns that were enunciated tonight. However, I believe that the applicant did do a good job addressing these concerns, and subject to the additional conditions that we're imposing, I think this project is a good one.
Good. Thank you very much. I'm going to keep my comments sort of short because I think all of our commissioners have gone over things, but I have particular concerns also about the water table and how you're going to make sure that the adjacent properties are protected as they dig, and they're going to hit the water table because it's pretty high at this point. And I don't see a condition in here, I just may have skipped it or misread it, and I've been looking over it, that requires the, as they excavate and they hit water, that the water be pumped into tanks and taken away rather than pumped into the neighborhoods and let it flow along public streets. So is that a condition? I didn't see it. I noticed that it has been in some of our resolutions as conditions, and I know for a fact that there is some construction going on even right now that doesn't have that condition in it, and they are pumping water into the streets. And as a matter of fact, sometimes during the summer when it was really hot, there was stagnant water and there were mosquito issues and so forth. So I would like to make sure that there's a condition in here that if they hit water, it doesn't get pumped into the street and flow into the neighborhoods or however it goes, but that it gets pumped into trucks and taken away. So that's one thing I would do. And I also like that we're going to now end the construction at 6 p.m. I think that's a good idea, particularly since there is a restaurant nearby, and I think that diners are going to be annoyed by the noise and traffic and so forth. I also, although this isn't anything that can be conditioned on this particular project, I think that the city might consider putting some speed bumps on Bonner Avenue along Sherborne to try and slow the traffic and maybe encourage people to go some other way instead of hitting those speed bumps, because people, particularly during rush hour traffic on our residential streets, are going way too fast. And I think that might help there. So perhaps staff could address that issue with our traffic people and building and safety. I also believe that, and I want to thank everybody for coming out here and speaking tonight, and your cooperation with regard to the speaking. And I apologize for some of the technical issues we've been having tonight, but we're going to take a break right after this, after our vote, and we'll try to fix them before we go on with our meeting. But I do want to also acknowledge that I think that the way these applicants worked with staff and with the neighbors is to be commended, and I want to appreciate that. And I would look forward to many applicants taking comments by the public and by commission and making the changes to improve their projects. I think it's a great thing, and I want to thank all of you for participating in that process. So with that, yes.
I'm sorry, there was one thing.
Okay.
Lori, we corresponded this afternoon about 11.17. Applicant shall install signs in the entrance of the parking garage that say no sounding of vehicles or secure alarms and shall be fined if sounded. You were going to clarify who shall be fined?
Yes, the building owner will be fined, and we'll add that to the condition.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, there's also one thing that could happen. We're concerned about people turning left instead of right. You could put a little bumper thing out in the passage, the exit of the parking structure that would make it quite difficult and damaging to a vehicle that attempted to make a left turn when they need to go right. So maybe you could include that also in the exit ramp.
Is that feasible? I mean, is that a big change, or is that something? I just want to confirm.
Is that a big change?
Well, I just think it's something that we would need to study. I'm not certain that would be the exact sort of mitigation we would put in, but you could certainly condition it so that we investigate some sort of method to accomplish the same goal.
Give a few traffic tickets in the beginning. That'll take care.
But whatever method that is feasible as far as either physically or visually encouraging drivers not to make a left turn.
Okay. So our city attorney, do we need to?
I'll make a motion.
Okay, Commissioner Altschul, motion.
I would move the staff recommendation with the addition of the conditions to add that were posted up on the screen, and with the addition of a condition proposed by the staff with respect to the water table and how to handle the mitigation, the excess mitigation of that. And well, that's it.
Okay. One moment.
You want to hit that?
So the motion would include all...
to bring back the revised resolution.
Oh, you want us to bring back a revised resolution?
Yeah, I think.
We can.
Oh, can you do? You want to do it?
We might be able to do it tonight.
Okay, go ahead, Laura.
Because they were written, most of the changes were written for you in advance on the PowerPoint presentation. So I just have a few changes to add based on the comments. We would
add. Wait,
yes. I did second it.
Okay.
Okay, so we would add language to condition 15.3 at the end to say, so the applicant shall verify and confirm the water table elevation as part of the final geotechnical review, and during construction, water removed from the site shall be in compliance with all applicable laws, including requirements of the Regional Water Quality Control Board, because I think the Regional Water Quality Control Board controls those watering activities. So we would add that to 15.3.
Thank you. That's
Or
why you're here.
dewatering.
Dewatering, exactly. Added condition 9.18, which was discussed during the applicant's comment, that the garage shall be lined with acoustablock lining in the ramp entrance, or its equivalent, to the satisfaction of the community development director. And then a condition 15.4 to say the applicant shall consider elements that encourage right turn only leaving the garage and incorporate them as feasible. Does that sound?
Yep.
Appropriate?
Is there anything
Satisfaction of the community development director?
Satisfaction of the community development director.
Right. That's fine.
Okay, we are all with that? We understand everything,
Yes.
right? Okay, then we'll call for vote. Close the public hearing.
And the motion passes unanimously. All commissioners voting aye, noting Vice Chair Jones as absent.
Okay, we're going to take a 10-minute break so that perhaps we can fix some of our technical issues. Those of you who want to remain here, we welcome you. Thank you. All commissioners, if you're in the house here, come on up and we'll get started. Okay, we're going to move on now to the next item, which is 10B. It's 11 North Orange Grove Avenue. We have a staff report. Are you guys ready? Yeah? Okay, good. Go ahead, thank you.
Great. Good evening, Chair Buckner and members of the Commission. The item before you this evening is an item that was continued from the September 7th Planning Commission meeting. This is a request to demolish 2 existing vacant units on a single parcel and construct a 4-story, 7-unit apartment building over a fully subterranean parking garage. At the September meeting, the project was continued to a date uncertain to allow the applicant to address the Commission's concerns regarding the design of private and common open space and stairwells to comply with building codes. Specifically, the Commission expressed concerns with the functionality around the common open space on the ground level and the open spaces on the rooftop or on the upper level. The applicant was asked to revise a project to address these design concerns, and the item before you includes those revisions. The revised project includes reconfiguration of the ground floor open space area to introduce a private open space for unit number 2. That's the ground floor unit at the rear. The common open space was reconfigured to provide 430 square feet a 430 square foot open space on the ground floor and a second 317 square foot space on the upper level for a total of 747 square feet of common open space, exceeding the minimum 500 foot requirement. The reconfiguration was accomplished by relocating the trash enclosure in the rear area that was previously abutting the common open space, adding additional landscape planters, and rearranging the layout of amenities within the common open space. The second concern from the Commission included the 2 uncovered stairwells up to the 4th level. In response, the applicant has enclosed both stairwells. This was accomplished by reconfiguring the placement of the stairwells at each level and enclosing the stairwell at the upper level with an enclosure not exceeding the height of the 4th floor. The Commission also requested that Commissioner Cavallero meet with the applicant and staff to discuss the Commission's design concerns. And this occurred in September. The Commissioner met with the applicant and staff, including our city's urban designer, to discuss the various design solutions which resulted in the design that's before you this evening. I wanted to mention a proposed amendment to the conditions. There's 2 conditions that are meant to address the parking for contractors, the construction crew during the construction phase. That would be condition number 612 and condition number 11.6. Both of them have the same intent, except one is more restrictive than the other. And staff's in reviewing this further, after discussion, we recommend that we eliminate condition number 612 and modify 11.6 to incorporate that language. And so I wanted to read that language into the record. So again, the recommendation is to eliminate condition 612 and modify condition 11.6. The condition would read, vehicles belonging to independent contractors, subcontractors, and/or employees who are doing construction or renovations on a residential property shall not park on any street within West Hollywood and shall utilize off-street parking secured by the contractor until the on-site parking is completed and is able to be used. Such vehicles are prohibited from using residential, guest, and/or visitor parking permits. Any encroachment permit issued for the construction project other than parking requires at least 72 hours advance planning in a residential zone to ensure that no conflicts with other work being performed on the neighboring properties or public street. So again, it combines both conditions, eliminating one, modifying the other. And the other item I wanted to mention, it was mentioned by a commissioner. This had to do with the placement of the elevator. The project is designed to have, and has been in the previous design as well, to have the elevator go from the ground floor to the 3rd floor, terminate at the 3rd floor. There is an additional unit on the 4th floor, as well as the private open spaces and now the additional common open space. To get to the 4th floor, for accessibility, the applicant has proposed a lift. So the elevator does not go up to the 4th floor. It ends at the 3rd, then you exit the elevator, go up the lift. So I wanted to mention that that's part of the design. The architect or the applicant can further elaborate on their intent. It's staff's understanding that the reason for that was to eliminate some of the bulk and massing on that level. Part of the project's design is to have very deep set the structure further back at both the rear and the front area, and further enclosing the elevator would create another mass. And with that, overall, the project is well suited for the site. It's thoughtfully designed and complementary to the context of the neighborhood, and it meets the applicable development standards. So it's staff's assessment that the revised project successfully responds to the Commission's concerns from our previous meeting, and therefore staff continues to recommend that the Commission approve the project request as revised, subject to the findings in your resolution, including the two conditions, 612 being eliminated and 11.6 being modified. And then wanted to just briefly show, and I understand the applicant has some renderings here and can elaborate on the design. This is what was presented on September 7th. This is the initial design, and this is the proposed design. The change is on the upper level, and that's the enclosed staircase. So here it does not include it, here it includes it. At the rear, this was the previous or the initial design, and this revised version now includes the enclosure of the elevator shaft on the 4th floor. So previous and revised. With that, this concludes my presentation. The applicant, the property owner, and the project architect is available for questions, as well as staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Antonio. Any question of staff before we move on? Seeing none, then I'm going to invite the applicant forward to address the commission. Again, you have 10 minutes to share with us what you want us to know about your project.
Good evening. My name is Amit Appel, owner of Pell Design. So basically, we did a presentation before. There was a couple of concerns. There are valid concerns. We tried to address them. As we do usually, we created a small short movie that gives you the aspect of all the building, so we don't need to guess anything. We made sure in the movie, as you see, we left the cameras in the same angle, meaning the comparison between what you saw before and now, we didn't change angle of camera, so you'll see the minimum effect of the changes, but there is changes, and you'll see it very clearly. We obviously took in consideration Commissioner David about the motorcycle in the beginning. We made sure that we cleared it. We made the right one. Besides that, there was an issue with the elevators. Before we came, Tony called us yesterday about not clear how the elevator works, that it goes to the 3rd floor. I know usually you see elevators that have a pool elevator that create another big structure on top of the elevator itself. We're actually using an elevator that the mechanic comes from below. So it requires only about 3 feet above the ceiling height of the cabin itself. So I made a section to be sure, and I gave it to Tony, that it actually fits. And beside that, we have about 2 feet more in height. We always leave some kind of leg room in construction. It's not accurate to the inch. So I have at least about 2 feet. If they need to double the floor on the rooftop, it's still going to fit in. So we make sure that all that works. And then from the 3rd floor to the 4th floor, the handicap lift. And exactly like Tony said, we see a lot of narrow lots that have been designed, and you have these piers, there's no other place to put them. So we found out that if we do to the 3rd floor, that's why we distribute the units the way they distribute. And it's very easy. If you go to the 3rd floor, just next to you, there is the lift to go up to the 4th floor. So it's not inconvenient. It's not that you need to go across the building. So it's very, very simple, and we left the bulkiness, inside the building itself. So that was the idea. We have the height, we have the ability to pull the elevator all the way up to the 4th floor, but we just didn't see any reason to go for that, just to save the design as much as we can. So if you just look at the quick movie that we did, and I'm here to answer any question you need.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Any questions at this point? Our technical, our stuff is not working, so I don't know about speakers. Do we have any public speakers?
No, we have no public speakers for this item.
Okay. So, anything you want to add? Can call it rebuttal if you want or not.
No, I just forgot to mention, because one of the requests is about the open common space in the back. I mean, I think it's obvious in the movie, and we're sitting in, so I hope it's to your satisfaction. It just makes sense. And we moved all the mechanicals to the back side, so it really feels more like a common area.
Yeah, much nicer, I think. Thank you. Any comments? Shall we openly deliberate at this point? Okay. Or if there's no discussion.
I'll make comment.
Roger, yes, I'm
just
interested in knowing what you were able to do and what you did to help.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for being open to meeting and discussing the public areas. Those were the areas I was most concerned about, because as our city becomes more dense, we can't afford to have inhabitable or unusable open areas. So we met and we focused on that patio on the ground floor to the back, and adding an open space to Unit 2, which is on the ground floor, and reformatting the patios on the roof deck so that they are more communal and less box-like like they were before. I think the project has improved greatly, and I think it definitely it's more than adequate for the neighborhood. And I like that the aesthetic is cleaner, and I think it was a good move overall.
Yeah, I agree. Any other comments?
Comment and one question. I think it's definitely a big improvement. I thank you. I did miss the pigeon. You know, David got to keep his motorcycle.
I saw the pigeon. There were two pigeons right there in the front.
I missed it.
Yeah, I saw two pigeons.
Okay. Thank you for keeping the pigeons then. Yes, I think this is much improved, and thank you for taking our comments and working with Commissioner Caballero to address them. I still have it's just a conceptual thing about the open space on the roof. In particular, I'm looking at Unit 2. And yes, thank you for adding their private open space onto the unit itself. I think that's very valuable. But that space on the roof, I looked at Unit 2 in the back on the ground floor, and I said, if I lived there and I wanted to have friends over for dinner up on the roof, I would have to go out my door with my food and everything and walk the length of the building to the elevator, go up an elevator, go through another door, go to the ADA lift, carry all that up the ADA lift, go back through another door, go back down the length of the building just to get to my patio. And God forbid I should forget the ketchup, because that's quite a trek to get to my private open space on the roof. So I understand you've done what you've done. That's just my comment conceptually. When we're talking about open space, it really needs to be accessible and functional, and I don't see that particular space as being that for that unit. The others are a little bit, have more space, et cetera. But that said, my only other question was back to the elevator. And now you said that you would need 3 feet of clearance above the cab for the mechanicals?
Just from the cab. So the cab is 7'2".
Okay.
And then we need 3 feet above that. So we have
10 foot inside the envelope. Okay, that's what I wanted to clarify. Thank you.
That section, just in case we gave it to Tony, we clarified.
Oh, yes, please come to the microphone. Sorry, we can hear you, but people behind can't.
Just in case, we made a section to confirm that, and we gave it to Antonio before the hearing today, because we just heard about the concern yesterday night.
Yeah, because it just visually, I was trying to, as it didn't come up in the
I
side
got a little
elevations.
heart attack, to be
yes,
honest. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Any other comments? If not, I just wanted to say that I think that the project is much improved. I even like the materials, the colors that you're using. It gives it a lot more interest and excitement, and I appreciate you working to make it a better project. Thank you very much. So with that, do I have a motion?
Okay. I have to do a voice vote.
Second.
We don't have a,
We
no
don't
tech.
have a technical.
So we'll have to do by voice.
I will
like we
move the
did
staff
old-fashioned way.
recommendation.
I'll second that.
Okay. Any comments by commissioners on the motion itself?
Nope.
No. With that, I'll call for the vote. We can't vote, can we? Oh, yeah, we can. There you
Oh, we
go.
can vote. There you go.
And the motion passes unanimously, all commissioners voting aye, noting Vice Chair Jones absent.
Thank you. Moving on then, and thank you for being here on that item. We'll move on to 10C, which is 7326 Santa Monica Boulevard. Take a minute so our staff can get settled and. And we have John Mayer, right?
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the Planning Commission. My name is John Mayer, Senior Planner for the city's current and historical preservation planning division.
Hold on, just a minute, John. Can we have you guys go out and take your conversations outside, please, so that the commissioners can hear the staff and your comments?
I was just going to say, I think our secretary has to do his appeal, blah, blah.
Oh, yes, thank you. David, you need to do your little appeal thing.
For the last project.
Sorry. Thank you for that. Keeping me on my toes, girl.
The resolution the Planning Commission just approved regarding 1150 North Orange Grove Avenue memorializes the Commission's final action on this matter. This action is subject to appeal to the City Council. Appeals must be submitted within 10 calendar days from this date to the City Clerk's office. Appeals must be in writing and accompanied by the required fees. The City Clerk's office can provide appeal forms and information about waiver of fees.
Thank you. Now we'll go on to our item 10C. Thank you for your patience.
And thank you. And good evening, Commissioners. Again, my name is John Mayer. I'm the Senior Planner for the current and historical preservation planning division here at the city. The item that you have before you tonight is a request for a conditional use permit to operate a dog daycare facility at 7326 Santa Monica Boulevard. The subject tenant space is located on the ground floor of a mixed-use development known as the Movietown Avalon Complex. This 3-acre property includes 371 residential units and 32,300 square feet of ground floor commercial space. The entire property is within the Movietown specific plan, which allows commercial uses that serve the local community as well as the broader market areas. Commercial uses surrounding the subject site include athletic studios, bars, restaurants, and beauty salons. There is also a production studio and grocery store to the west, and to the east is the historic studio complex known as The Lot, and the Gateway commercial area is further east. The subject space would be located right at the corner of the project site next to a Wells Fargo bank. The space on the other side of Wells Fargo is currently vacant, but there are plans for a restaurant and a bar and a coffee shop. Further to the east is the Trader Joe's grocery store. Parking for all of the commercial area is located in the subterranean garage, where there are 228 parking spaces available for customers and residential guests. The applicant is representing a business known as City Dog Club. It plans to open a new pet daycare facility for dogs. The subject space is 4,328 square feet in size, and the City Dog Club has similar locations throughout California, Seattle, Texas, and Washington, D.C. The business offers cage-free dog daycare within these indoor play parks, and there are 4 of them in the proposed floor plan here. Additional services would also include overnight boarding and pet grooming. The dogs would be separated according to their size and temperament. The entire space would have a series of doors and gates in order to secure the dogs, and the pets would also have access to an eating and resting area. There would be a style bar for dog grooming and a lobby where owners can wait for their pets and purchase pet-related items. The business hours would be from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m., 7 days a week. The applicant anticipates 10 employees during the operating hours, and that number would be reduced to 2 employees for the overnight boarding. The facility would accommodate up to 60 dogs during the operating hours, and this number would be reduced down to 20 dogs for the overnight boarding hours. Dog owners will have live web access through a series of cameras throughout the facility so that they can watch their pets from afar. All the dogs will undergo a meet and greet process. This is where staff can review the behavior of the dogs, and they'll be accepted if they are sociable, on good behavior, and void of any disruptive behavior like chronic barking. The employees will also check their vaccine records and conduct a health and flea check. The zoning code allows dog kennels with boarding provided that a conditional use permit is approved. This allows the Planning Commission to approve the use under certain conditions or controls so that the activities won't interfere with adjacent uses. There are residential uses right above the space and a bank to the side of it. Potential annoyances from this use would be odors and noise. So in order to control the odors, the applicant is proposing to install high-frequency air ventilation systems and HEPA filters. This will protect against bacteria and odor. They are planning to install concrete floors with a waterproof top coat and use of stainless steel equipment, and these are materials that help repel odors. They are going to stock service stations with sanitizers and commercial washer and dryer and cleaning equipment. They are also going to have internal staff be responsible for the cleanliness, and this is important so that any complaints about odor can be responded to immediately. And it also helps to create a sense of accountability for any odor complaints. The applicant is also installing 9 waste receptacles throughout the facility, and these are very similar to a kitty litter box, but only designed for dogs. In order to control noise, the applicant is proposing to construct a double wall along the shared wall with Wells Fargo Bank for sound insulation. The double wall is basically a very wide insulated gap between the 2 tenant spaces. It includes a set of wall studs that will be completely filled with insulation material. They will also install a suspended grid ceiling with acoustical ceiling panels suspended below the concrete ceiling. The current ceiling is a concrete slab which is expected to reduce the sound impacts to the neighbors above, but the applicant is taking a step forward, an extra step basically, to propose these acoustical ceiling tiles for additional soundproofing. These measures are included in the conditions of approval in the draft resolution. Some of the other conditions of approval would include a requirement that the dogs are leashed or otherwise secured when leaving the facility. The applicant would also be subject to all public health requirements and licenses required by the appropriate agencies. This would include the LA County Department of Animal Care and Control. And any proposed signs for the business would need to be consistent with the building sign program. Staff is recommending approval of this application with the adoption of draft resolution PC 17-1236. This use is categorically exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act because it is a small commercial use going into an existing structure in an urbanized area. Staff believes that the required findings of fact can be made to approve this use based on it being a neighborhood-serving use to a growing number of residents in this area, and the use would also be made benign with the conditions of approval. With that, I'd like to conclude my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions from the Commission. Also, the applicant is in the audience for any additional questions.
Thank you. Any questions, staff? No?
I have just 2.
You have 2 questions, staff, before we go forward?
Sure.
Thank you.
I think this seems well thought through. It's not that big a deal, but the obvious is the noise. And so with that in mind, and I get the acoustical tiles, yes, but there's a lot of different grades of acoustical tiles. This isn't my expertise, but I would say that the condition should be, thou shalt use the most acoustical of the acoustical tiles. So that, because I have visions of that, the units up above having, all it takes is, you know, one dog setting off all the dogs and you've got a bit of a event going on. And at 2 a.m. or whatever, that can be quite annoying. So whatever we can do to make that the maximum acoustical reparation, that would be my recommendation.
Okay.
And then the only other thing is in your operations language, you have a couple of items that it's about maintaining written procedures. I would amend that to say to maintain and enforce the procedures, not just have it in writing, but thou shalt actually do it.
Thank you.
Okay. We have our applicants represented at the podium. You have 10 minutes, Mr. Elliott.
Thank you. Good evening, Commissioners. Todd Elliott with Truman and Elliott, practicing law at 626 Wilshire Boulevard in Los Angeles. I'll try to give you a brief report. My associate, Foxy Lady, is assisting me this evening. I did want to correct staff. The proposed hours of operation are 7 to 9 p.m., not 9 to 7. A few things that you should know. City Dog maintains 4 different play areas because dogs, like people, are not all alike, and sometimes size, gender, age, or weight are not the only factors that determine which play area a dog is initially assigned to. The special cleaning products, including the poopy patches, are designed to comply with environmental standards. Pee-pee goes in the sewer and poo-poo goes in the trash. The extra sound installation and these measures were actually negotiated between the tenant and the landlord. So these are not measures that the city is proposing. These were negotiated because the landlord, Avalon Bay, of course, doesn't want disturbance between their next door commercial neighbor and the upstairs neighbors. So it's not as though we just came and proposed to you this. We had all of this in mind before coming to you. With regard to sound, so I did get a call from the planner asking me about sound and the coefficient of ceiling tiles. So here's my little sound lesson. The highest recorded decibel in history is 194 decibels, a ball being shot out of a cannon. The highest decibel for a trained dog is 113 decibels, but that dog was trained to yelp as loud as possible. There was a study done taking that 113 decibels using 67 dogs, and the increase only led to 129 decibels. In modern day, a loud barking dog is at 95 decibels. If you took 60 of those dogs together, the decibels would be 98. The coefficient of the least effective ceiling tile is 40%. So you would then have a 60% of 98, which mathematically is 58.8 decibels or 59 below the 60 decibel limitation for sound under the noise ordinance. I didn't just figure this out. These folks have done their homework because they operate these businesses not just here in Los Angeles, but in Washington and other states. So I would encourage them to use the same modeling that they're using for ceiling tiles so that they make sure and do what they're currently doing, which is good work. With that said, I would be happy to answer any other questions, including geeky sound and vibrational analysis, which I welcome.
I do have a question. You said that you're going to have that double wall on the wall that is common with the bank.
Correct.
But I thought I heard that there's going to be a restaurant on the other side of the space occupied by your...
No, this is a corner.
Oh, it's on the other side of the bank. Okay, I
So on the
misheard.
other side of the bank,
Cool.
there hasn't been a formal lease or CUP signed, but that's likely going to be a restaurant. Of the 32,000 square feet of retail space, 40% is occupied. I'm sorry, 2/3 of it is now occupied and or leased, leaving only about 9,000 square feet left.
Okay, I just was thinking that it was right next door and you need a double wall on the other side.
No.
Thank you. Thanks for clarifying that for me. Any other comments?
I just want to thank you for your very well done, actually, briefing on sound coefficients. But 60 is the maximum. And so to be at 59 is, there's not a lot of wiggle room there. So anything you can do to reduce that would be...
We agree. We don't want to disturb our neighboring tenants, but I was giving you the worst case scenario.
My concern isn't so much about the sound, because being very familiar with these type of environments, when dogs start barking, they often get pulled apart by the people who are managing them. So it'll only happen for a moment, and it's during the day. So I think the sound issue is less an issue for me than actually the odor issue, which often when you go into these facilities, there's a detergent smell to it. And I understand that you probably understand that, and how do you plan on dealing with that so it doesn't permeate into the businesses or the area around it?
Did you say a detergent or a pungent smell?
Disinfectant.
The cleaning solutions that often these facilities use, that smells worse than anything else. And how does the air system mitigate that? Or are you using it? Are you using biodegradable cleaners that don't have an odor?
Yes, that we are using biodegradable, but also if you saw in the staff report, they are using HEPA filters as well as part of their HVAC system, which is more than you would expect at a normal doggy daycare, which would not require a CUP.
And this has proven successful in your other establishments, right? Because when you go to LA Dog Works and some of those other establishments on Highland, there's this particular smell, and it's not the pup smell, it's the detergent smell. So obviously you've dealt with this, and the HEPA filters deal with that. So great, thank you.
That's not only offensive to people, but offensive to the animals too. So if they're all well-behaved like this dog, then there we go.
And she doesn't make any noise.
Yeah, how about that? You brought your model with you. Okay, thank you very much.
Any
At
other
this
questions?
point, do we have any more questions? No? Do we have any public speakers?
No public speakers.
Public speakers. How about some disclosures before we go into deliberation? I did have a very, very brief conversation with Mr. Elliott. We really didn't talk about this much other than he was going to be here tonight on this project, so that was about as far as we went, but I did speak for a few minutes. No one else? Okay. Then...
We have a motion by Commissioner Hoopengarner and a second by Commissioner Agai.
Okay, then unless there's some comment on the motion.
I just want to clarify that I'd like to move to adopt with the amendments that I previously discussed. That's it.
So to adopt the resolution with the amendments.
With the amendments that I mentioned earlier, with the enforcement language in the relevant items, I think it's 4.6 and 7. And
you know what those are, right? Our city attorney?
You're referring to condition number 4.6?
Excuse me, and 7.
Okay. That the operator shall maintain written procedures for accepting dogs into the dog daycare kennel, including an evaluation of each dog for its size and temperament prior to admittance into the club. The written procedures shall also include a screening process where the staff will review each dog's vaccine records, health and flea check prior to admittance in the club, and that these written procedures shall be enforced.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, ready for the vote.
And the same with 4.7.
I'm sorry?
The same with 4.7.
And same for 4.7, yeah. Okay.
You know, I mean, I wouldn't say you need to be that verbose about it. Just say the operator shall maintain written policies and enforce, and then you're done.
Okay. And regarding the ceiling tiles, they're to be, to have the maximum coefficient, or?
Is that what you mean?
Yeah, that's what.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
that the,
Lynn, you didn't vote.
Lynn, are you voting?
Okay.
And the motion passes unanimous, all commissioners voting aye, noting Vice Chair Jones absent. The resolution the Planning Commission just approved memorializes the Commission's final action on this matter. This action is subject to appeal to the City Council. Appeals must be submitted within 10 calendar days from this date to the City Clerk's office. Appeals must be in writing and accompanied by the required fees. The City Clerk's office can provide appeal forms and information about waiver of fees.
Thank you. Just a moment or two for our staff to get settled for the next item.
Good evening, Madam Chair, fellow commissioners. My name is Rachel Diamond.
And this is item 11, new business, public benefits policy. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. My name is Rachel Diamond. I'm a senior planner in the Long Range and Mobility Division. And tonight before you is the public benefits framework the city has been working on for quite some time. And tonight we are here to get comments from the commission before a policy is reviewed by the City Council. So public benefits. We do have precedents for public benefits. It's referenced in the general plan and the municipal code. Essentially, public benefits are the provision of or construction of items to the community, such as parks and facilities, and also fees in lieu that help the city pay for certain community amenities, essentially, that are associated with certain projects. Today, our current practice is that projects like development agreements, general plan amendments, and other projects that are asking for development potential above and beyond what the zoning code allows are required to provide public benefits, again, per the general plan and municipal code. So what we do is today, on a case-by-case basis, we basically negotiate projects that are requesting that increased intensity, and it truly has been a process that's been on a case-by-case basis. And the problem really is that there's no standard process or evaluation tool for all of these projects. And so the city really wanted to take a step back and take a look at the public benefits process and the types of projects that would be required to have public benefits, and essentially create a policy that we could follow for each project that would provide guidance for the city and for developers and for the community, as well as our reviewing boards. There are a number of challenges with that current process that we have today. Like I said, it's really a case-by-case basis. We don't have a standardized procedure, and the current process really lacks transparency and the ability for the community to provide input. It provides lack of predictability for not only the developer, but also for the community, for the Planning Commission, for the City Council. Today, public benefits are not discussed at the Planning Commission when you review a project. All of these projects, by the way, do go up to the City Council because they are all projects that require legislative actions. But until now, the public benefits were only discussed at City Council. So it really gave this commission no ability to weigh in on that aspect of the project. And really, we also don't have an approved list or a menu of community benefits from people to choose from. So it's really, as you can see from some of the examples in the past, has been kind of all over the place of things that we've allowed to be public benefits. And I should note that we included the list of previous public benefits to show you that wide range. And it really has been, while a very valuable process for the community, it really hasn't been standardized in the types of things that have been considered public benefits. So we wanted to develop a framework that would create a structure to have the discussion about public benefits, both with the developer, the community, as well as with our commissions and boards, and to evaluate each proposal. I do want to point out that while projects may provide public benefits, the public benefits themselves would not negate the requirements that the project meet the findings required of that project. So you would still need to make sure that a project met all of the criteria necessary the same way that you do today, and the public benefits wouldn't allow overriding of that. It's just in addition to also meeting those findings. These are things that help benefit the community and offset some of the impacts of this enhanced development. So truly the findings must be met regardless of the public benefits, and the public benefits themselves don't suddenly shift you to being able to make that finding, even with, you should be able to make the finding without the public benefits. So we wanted to create this new framework that created transparency and input from the community. We wanted to improve predictability. We really wanted to create a space for the Planning Commission to be inserted into this process and provide a menu of community benefits from the established list of kind of community needs that have been identified through our various approved documents and general plan. There are three key components of the framework, and I heard earlier from Commissioner Hoopengardner that you wanted to kind of break down the presentation in these three categories. I will break it down, but I asked that perhaps we can separate the comments into the three categories at the end, but we'll kind of run through. And I do have Paul Silvern here from HRNA, one of our consultants, who will walk you through a portion of that, of the key components of the framework. So the first is the policy document. It's included in Attachment A, and really what this document does is really just kind of a step-by-step guide of how do public benefits work, how do we establish what they are, and essentially how does this get inserted into the entitlement process? Because again, today, and I should say in the past, it's really been on a case-by-case basis where sometimes it happens early, sometimes it happens later. So we really wanted to get all of that information down into a policy document that we could follow every time and create some real transparency about how this process works. The second is the actual methodology to quantify the economic value of the requested zoning changes for a proposed project. And Paul will take over in just a moment to explain that piece. The third is the menu of the desirable public benefits, which is included in that policy document, but truly remains its own kind of living document. So the policy. Applicability is kind of the key item here. What projects does this really apply to? So generally, projects that have a development permit application that also include a zone text amendment, a zone map amendment, a general plan amendment, a specific plan, and that would be a new or amended specific plan, or a development agreement. These are all legislative changes, and they would ultimately be approved by the City Council, but all of these projects come before you. I would like to add that there are a number of projects that may fall into some of these categories that wouldn't likely need this process, and ultimately the policy will include language regarding the discretion of the city to determine whether a project actually enhances their value by, for example, a zone text amendment that maybe applies citywide. So we would include additional language regarding certain projects that don't necessarily enhance value, and so we wouldn't take them down this path. I'll give you an example. A zone text amendment was requested as part of the Crown application, if you recall. It's the building next door to City Hall and Santa Monica Boulevard. And they requested a zone text amendment that allowed for balconies, private open space to be incorporated into public open space under certain conditions that they then utilized for their project. Incorporating private open space into public open space isn't something that necessarily enhances the overall value of the project. And so in that particular case, in that specific example, we would potentially determine that we wouldn't go through this process. And again, that would still be something that we would discuss very openly and make sure to document the explanation in all of the reports so that there was a clear understanding of why that determination was made. So the economic valuation tool, I will turn it over to Paul Silvern.
Good evening, Commissioners. Again, Paul Silvern, Vice President with HRNA Advisors. We're a economic development, real estate advisory, and public policy consulting firm. We work all over North America with multiple offices around the country. I run our Los Angeles area office, And we have been working in West Hollywood from time to time, both on a pro bono and compensated basis since the year after the city was incorporated. We also work extensively in the other West Side communities, among lots of other jurisdictions. The topic under discussion this evening is becoming increasingly popular around California and elsewhere in the United States as communities wrestle with a dilemma in which their general plan and zoning codes or equivalent entitlement documents in other states make it possible for developers to ask for more than the development standards that would apply to what we refer to as a baseline project, an average project meeting the zoning code. And there are good reasons for that. You have provisions in your general plan and zoning code that make it possible under certain circumstances and in certain locations for developers to ask for somewhat larger projects, either in terms of height or floor area ratio or both, or other kinds of special exceptions. But in general, the larger the project, the higher the value to the developer and the property owner as a result of the enhanced entitlements. And so to the extent that the larger projects have to go through a discretionary review and approval process, and particularly where they require some legislative action ultimately by the City Council, it is common for there to be some bargaining that takes place between the developer and the local government in order to require certain kinds of public benefits in return for the more generous development standards which have a monetary value to the developer. The difficulty that often comes up in these discussions is how much of what. And so, what is a sort of fair value for the kinds of things that the cities and counties want out of a project in order to provide the development standards, the higher level of development standards, and at least in the case of development agreements, the higher level of entitlement and certainty that typically goes with a development agreement, which is often an agreement to essentially freeze the city's development standards for a period of 10 or more years. So there's an exchange of value discussion that very often takes place in this context. But it is often done without very many parameters around the nature of the negotiation. As Rachel said, West Hollywood's history has been to do this on a sort of ad hoc case-by-case basis, and in many jurisdictions that has been the case as well. But as more of these kinds of projects have developed, particularly in California and the more urbanized areas of the state, where there has been a pretty hot real estate market, at least in the last few years since the recovery from the Great Recession, more emphasis has been placed on trying to figure out an appropriate way to have these kinds of negotiations that meet all of the criteria that Rachel laid out in an earlier slide, including in particularly her first one about transparency. This is often a very confusing discussion for elected and appointed officials and very confusing for the general public. There have been a number of strategies developed over the years to try to deal with this and put some boundaries and more objective approaches around it. And one of the approaches that we want to talk about this evening is an approach that uses a set of very specific kinds of real estate finance analysis techniques in order to measure the value to the developer of the more generous development standards that they are seeking, in this case from the city of West Hollywood. Now, as you probably know, developers come in all shapes and sizes, levels of sophistication, access to capital, and every project is different in some respects. So while there are a lot of well-developed analytic techniques that can be used in this context, I would suggest that it is as much art as it is science. And so there are nuances to these cases, but what we have tried to do in framing an approach for your consideration this evening and ultimately for the City Council is to follow an approach for measuring the value of the enhanced entitlements to the developer using what we call a residual land value technique. As you may know, there are many, many investment return metrics that are used in the real estate industry: return on cost, cash on cash return, internal rate of return, and so forth. We have found, and our professional colleagues who do this work like we do for other cities have found, that the technique that is easiest to understand by the general public and most decision makers, and the one that has the virtue of being consistent with appraisal practice and with economic theory, is to focus on the difference that the enhanced entitlements make in the value of land. And so we have used and are proposing that West Hollywood consider using a residual land value technique which measures the change in implied land value associated with the enhanced entitlement to begin to frame a discussion. It doesn't tell you what the answer is, and it doesn't tell you, the exact dollar amount that you should be negotiating for or trying to equate public benefits to, but establishes a framework for an order of magnitude to begin a process of negotiation. And so what I'd like to do is very briefly walk you through the components of the residual land value analysis technique and show you how it produces this order of magnitude basis for having negotiations. The idea is that henceforth, assuming the council were to adopt a policy to implement this approach, that when developers come to the city asking for a greater level of land use entitlement than would otherwise be allowed at a given site, that they provide information about their proposed project, financial information about their proposed project at a fairly fine-grained level of detail. The city would then use one of a set of professionals like our firm and others, Kaiser Marston Associates and others that you've worked with before, to perform an independent review of those financials, but using a pre-designed analytic approach. And there is an attachment to our memorandum in your staff report this evening for this item, which illustrates what that standardized approach looks like. It's essentially a Excel workbook in which all of the information about the project is analyzed in order to produce the difference in residual land value between the proposed project and the base project. So illustrated in this side are the general components of what goes into the analysis. The very same math is done for the zoning code compliant project first, and then working through the very same analysis for the proposed project with higher development standards. And so what we look at in each case are obviously the characteristics of the project in terms of building height, FAR, number of units, square footage by land use type. We then calculate all the components of total development cost, which includes the hard cost, the cost of construction, the soft costs, the cost of professional services, city permits, insurance, and so forth, and the construction financing costs. All of that adds up to the total development cost. We then estimate the project's net operating income. Most of the projects that come before you are income-producing projects, though you occasionally see some condominium projects as well, but most of the projects are income-producing projects. And so we look at the project's revenue profile and its operating cost profile and compare the two to get what we call net operating income. We then apply a standard factor called an income capitalization rate to translate the net operating income to an implied sale value of the project in its first year of stabilization, and subtract from that the total development cost, an allowance for developer profit, and the bottom line at the end of all that is the residual land value for that particular scenario. And as I said, we do that for the zoning compliant base case. We do the same analysis for the proposed project, compare the two, and the difference in residual land value is the implied real estate value to the developer as a result of obtaining approval for the enhanced development standards. And that then can become the basis to inform a discussion between city staff, a negotiation really between city staff and the developer about the preferred community benefits for that particular project. And later in the discussion of this item, if you would like me to talk about any particular aspect of how this math is done, I'd be glad to do that.
So just to follow up with what Paul stated, any project that has a requirement to potentially provide public benefits would be identified early on when they first applied for the project, and ultimately we would have a required set of information that feeds into Paul's economic valuation tool that would be part of their completeness. So it would require essentially a worksheet that the applicant would fill out and provide to staff so that we could then engage with a consultant. So similar to our CEQA consultants, we would have kind of a bench of consultants that we could engage, and the city would actually engage the consultant. They would be working for the city, but it would be a pass-through contract where the city had a contract with the consultant, but the applicant would actually pay for those services. Once that analysis was conducted, as Paul described, we would then look at some potential community needs that were specific to the project. And so that brings me to the menu of benefits that we've established for this framework. And the menu of benefits is really important because we've been having this conversation for many years, since the city was created, because we have been establishing the adopted documents and general plan documents, and have been having these conversations about what does the community really need, and what do the people want. And so we've been engaging with the community for many years, particularly recently when we adopted a new general plan. And so these come out of our adopted plans. And we use this as kind of a baseline for a menu for projects. So the first is arts and cultural facilities, programs, and funding. And we recently adopted WeHo Arts, the plan, which is super exciting and has a number of identified needs for art in this community. And you will see a number of projects in the near future that do have art components, such as gallery space, potentially for the city. Affordable housing. I think every comment tonight for every project included some aspect of affordable housing conversation, maybe minus the dog kennel, but that is affordable housing. And, that's providing additional affordable housing over the required inclusionary requirements or commercial linkage fees could also be considered public benefit, particularly when it comes into kind of senior assisted living and independent living, transitional housing. There's a number of housing types that we are in great need of. And so those could be considered public benefits. Parking resources, on-site parking in areas with an identified parking need. And we do have parking studies that show various identified parking areas. Public parks and open space. This is a very commonly requested amenity from the community, especially in places where there aren't enough park facilities or open space facilities. And so that could include public plazas, playgrounds, paseos. Community facilities, again, I spoke a little bit to the gallery potential, but community space, we see this often in projects where they have a community space and the city has provided the ability to utilize those spaces, or community groups are provided the ability to use those spaces. Child care, nonprofit space, performing arts facilities, community gardens. These are all things that we are in need of in this community and could be provided as a public benefit for certain projects. Streetscape and mobility improvements, these are also key, and we see these, we have a number of streetscape needs moving forward, particularly in the design district with their streetscape plan. And I just want to remind you that any improvement would be outside of the requirements of the code. So, for example, you're required to improve the sidewalk in front of your building, so that wouldn't count towards the public benefit. But if you did, for example, the entire block, that additional space could be considered part of your public benefits. Public health and sustainability, we do have a climate action plan, and implementation of those measures, again, could be considered a public benefit. And then we have my favorite category, the other. And this is really, you know, it's meant to be open-ended. We really want to be flexible here, and particularly because we want to be able to allow for things we haven't really thought of. And I mean, we see with the changes in technology that there are a lot of things in land use that we have not realized until they show up and ask for it. And certainly we want things that are in the other category that are still consistent with city goals. But again, we wanted to provide that flexibility because I think, you know, being the creative city, I think there are a ton of creative people here who can come up with really interesting ideas that perhaps aren't on this list. And we didn't want to pigeonhole people by putting it, keeping a very specific list that was set in stone. We do want this process to be flexible and allow for creativity. Things that cannot be considered public benefits, this is really important. CEQA mitigation measures, for example, cannot be considered public benefits. These are required by state law, and we don't want to double dip. Similarly, code-required improvements to the site and directly adjacent right-of-way could not be considered a public benefit. So, you know, I use the sidewalk example, and I think that's the easiest example. Again, we don't want people double dipping. We already require you to do something, so this is all about above and beyond. So how does this work? So I kind of talked you through getting to the economic consultant. They do their analysis and create that delta of residual land value that we kind of use as kind of a starting point of just understanding the value of the project. And so one of the things that we really haven't been able to do as part of our previous process is to really get public input on community benefits because we haven't been talking about them early enough. So again, you'll see this is starting at application, you know, date, and really it's starting before that because people will start really thinking about it more because of this policy. And so what we really wanted to do was create a framework for the community to provide input and to get involved and not just respond to a package, but provide their own ideas. I mean, that other category and truly the established benefits, you know, really allow for the community to weigh in. They are the neighbors, they are our city, and we really want to understand what it is that they're interested in seeing. So the first piece of the public input piece would be to have a specific conversation about public benefits at their already scheduled community meeting. So as you know, any project that comes before you has a community meeting, typically about 60 days after application date. In this case, we would create a process to have that conversation. You know, our ideas generally include having that menu available, having a map available of the hyper-local neighborhood, but also of the entire city, because public benefits will potentially be directly adjacent to a project, but also could be citywide. An example being affordable housing elsewhere in the city, still a benefit. So we would engage with the community and have specific conversations about what they'd like to see as a public benefit. And I think that really, you know, engages people in a really new way and gets them thinking about different aspects of the project that they really haven't been able to kind of get involved in or be part of the narrative. Essentially, in previous projects, the public benefits come up at council and that's it. And so there's a response to those benefits, but there hasn't been that ability to really weigh in. You know, a lot of people don't come to these community meetings or are unable to, and we really wanted to make sure that people understand that this is something that we are interested in getting input and feedback on. So we would include information that public benefits may be required for this project on the notice. And so this would be both on the physical notice, and this would also be the physical notice that's posted on the site, and the notice that gets mailed to people. And it would provide kind of a forum for people to include that information in their comments. You know, people get a letter in the mail, and they then respond with a letter in response to the project. And this would allow them to weigh in and encourage them to provide us with any ideas that they have on benefits that the project could provide. Additionally, the public benefits would be discussed not only at City Council, but with the Planning Commission. So it does give the community one additional public meeting and public hearing, rather, to discuss public benefits. So it would be something that we would encourage people to also discuss in their public comments should they wish to do so. Ultimately, we would get a number of, a bunch of input from the community, and this would be summarized in a public input memo that would essentially be included into the public record and would track with the project. So you would get a summary of all of the input that we received at Planning Commission, and similarly, the council would also receive that. So I'll walk you through the remainder of the steps. That takes you to negotiation. So we've now established that delta residual land value through the economic valuation tool. We've now gotten community input, and prior to going to Planning Commission for review, we would start the negotiation process. Essentially, the city manager, who is the head of the negotiation team, would assemble his team, his or her, to negotiate with the developer on public benefits. Typically, developers come to the table with their own proposal. And I think what's really interesting here is that with the public input, there's a real opportunity for the developers to really hear what the community is interested in. Whereas before, it was somewhat of a guessing game in that they were looking for, benefits that seemed to meet our needs, but weren't necessarily in response to comments that they heard. And so what the city does is basically negotiates with the developer to find the appropriate amount for public benefits. And I stress appropriate because it's not always about getting more. It's truly about getting the appropriate amount of value in the public benefits. And within that negotiation, there's a number of things that come into play, like whether the developer would provide actual benefits, such as the construction of a park, or a monetary fee in lieu that would then pay for said park. So there is a bit of a difference there, and there is a different value that's potentially attached to those things, whether they're providing it for us or we're building said provision. And there's also, the provision, certain public benefits might be cumulative. So, maybe 3 projects contribute a certain amount of money to get us to a target goal, for example, to buy a piece of property and build a community garden. That was something we heard from the community when we engaged with them on this process. Ultimately, the city negotiation team and the developer would negotiate out a public benefits package as part of the negotiated development agreement, which is the legal instrument that's typically used for public benefits, although it could be wrapped into conditions of approval for certain other types of projects like specific plans or the development permit associated with a ZTA or a general plan amendment, for example. So once that package was established, we would then go back to the consultant and do an analysis of that. In some cases, it's all a fee in lieu, if that's what the city is looking for at the time, or if that's the appropriate instrument at the time. But there are also provisions of actual physical benefits that we would need to essentially monetize for, just to give you an understanding, both the commission and the city council, of what it actually means and what the value is of that package. Again, we would then go to the Planning Commission and the City Council to discuss the public benefits. And ultimately, we're looking for the Planning Commission to weigh in on, are these the appropriate benefits? And are there things that we can change, suggested changes, or, kind of the rubber stamp of the benefits that seem to be appropriate for that project, and it's not only its impact, but to kind of help fill that need. Again, I think during the negotiation process, there's definitely an understanding of, when fees in lieu are paid. And I do want to note that in the policy, we note in the fee in lieu payment that it must be paid prior to issuance of building permit. I do want to note that we'd like to add a provision that says, or is otherwise authorized by, the legal instrument that's applicable to the project. And this is because, again, we want to provide flexibility to these projects and to the negotiation process and the development agreement process to really fit the needs of whatever that project and the city's needs at that time. And it may be that, in some cases in the past, we've had people kind of pay us fees in lieu over time during construction to be completed by the time there's certificate of occupancy, as an example. So we really wanted to provide that flexibility to allow for the city's negotiation team and ultimately the Planning Commission and the City Council to allow for different versions of public benefits and the fees in lieu. I think a really key piece of the policy as well is the monitoring and annual report. So as we, continue to accumulate public benefits, we really want to keep track of how this framework is working and what we're doing with all these public benefits and how it works. So we would, on an annual basis, commit to going before the Planning Commission and the City Council with a report that highlights here are the benefits that we have been provided by certain projects, and here's what either that fee in lieu is doing, or here's how that benefit is doing in terms of was it constructed, for example? Is the project completed? In some cases, I think, like I said, a cumulative public benefit that multiple projects each contribute to a fund, we would also track those funds. If someone was contributing to the Affordable Housing Fund and we had 10 fees in lieu to the Affordable Housing Fund, we could show that those 10 fees in lieu ultimately created enough money to then build a new building. So it would really not only serve as a reminder to the community of what we're doing, again, for the increased transparency, but it also serves as a reminder to staff of kind of how, if we're taking money, that we're reaching our goal, and we're kind of establishing goals for ultimately utilization of those funds to create provision of goods and services to the community. We'll also have a provision about projects not constructed. This is a rare happening in West Hollywood, but it does happen that sometimes projects do not get built. And we do want to ensure that we have language in the development agreement or other legal instrument that really kind of clarifies what happens if you don't actually do this. In some cases, like a specific plan, they run with the land. So it's a true change in their potential. So those may be different than a DA that, for example, sunsets at a certain point. So there are a number of next steps that will happen with this policy. The first is that this policy will not include any changes to the municipal code. So this isn't a zone text amendment. This is actually really different than what we typically see before you. It's a policy document. Ultimately, the City Council, should they decide to do so, would adopt this policy document by resolution. But tonight we are here to get comment from the Planning Commission, because I think it's essential that, because you will see all of these public benefits, that you also see this policy framework and provide input to the council and to staff as well. Ultimately, the plan is to go to City Council on January 16th, 2018. I can't believe I typed 19. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. But so, tonight we're really looking forward to getting comment from the Planning Commission. And I particularly wanted to highlight some questions that I'm looking for comment on. One is, does the public benefits menu provide a good baseline, or are we missing anything? Does the public benefits process provide the right procedures to determine and require public benefits? And that's really the entirety of the policy, including that framework and the economic valuation tool. And then, does the community input process provide adequate procedures for public engagement? This is really important to us. We really want to engage the community on this and get them involved. So if you see other ways that we can do so, I'd love to hear them. With that, I will open it up to questions. I appreciate your input.
Question.
John.
For years, this process has gone on rather exclusively between the council, the very senior staff, and the developer. And the public and the Planning Commission, nobody else has really been involved in it. I'm assuming that the methods of calculation have remained fairly consistent, and that there's nothing new under the sun here that's rather notable. However, what is the thinking or the motivation behind expanding this at this point to include the Planning Commission?
We really wanted to provide the opportunity not only for the public to weigh in, but for the Planning Commission to weigh in on this fairly important aspect of the project. And typically it wasn't discussed until council, and we wanted to come before the body that reviews development projects on a regular basis.
Well, and it's entirely consistent with your role as advisory to the council when they're making legislative decisions, particularly when it comes to zone changes, general plan amendments, and development agreements, and specific plans.
So is this discussion held at the same time as the entitlement discussion and the discussion for granting the entitlement, or the discussion for recommending the approval of the EIR?
Yes.
Yes.
If you've engaged the community before the Planning Commission reviews the possible benefit that we want to implement, at what point, what can the Planning Commission do at that point if it's already been decided where the monies might be allocated towards? Or will we have a say that's like, okay, we want to fund this pot instead of that project?
Well, like Paul said, it would be advisory to the council. So while we would have a proposal on the table from the negotiation team with the developer and a draft, essentially DA or whatever legal instrument, it would not be set in stone until the council makes a final decision. So we would come to the Planning Commission to get a recommendation to council on those items, particularly, as well as the project itself, obviously. And so they would consider the Planning Commission's recommendations in making their final decision.
And by the time it gets to us, it's gone through several rounds with the community, and then they have another chance to voice their opinion here.
It would be essentially one neighborhood meeting where we would collect that information, as well as, avenues for people to write us letters or come to this meeting. But it wouldn't be several rounds with the community. It would likely be, it would be, a discussion. We would go to the community. We would then do negotiation with the developer, then come to the Planning Commission for recommendation, and then council for final decision.
Got it.
So along those lines, and I like your question, would there, and this maybe legal can help with, would there be an opportunity to have a more informal type public hearing that we invite a larger community instead of the immediate community, given that some of these development agreements and some of these specific plans are rather large. They're very large projects and they're very comprehensive and they have big impacts throughout the city. Could we maybe think outside the box about having this venue be maybe not as part of a regular Planning Commission hearing, but this body inviting the community in a larger context to have precisely this conversation? Because I like your idea, Rachel, and I think, engaging the community, and we do have a very creative community that could have some great ideas if we stimulate them in a way and give them a forum to have that open discussion. Is that something that is, how might that happen?
Well, I think one of the main goals of this proposal is more transparency and more community input. So if the commission has some ideas as to how best to accomplish that, I think staff's open to hearing them and presenting them to the city council. I don't know if you have experience with what you've done in other cities.
I was just going to describe the process in Santa Monica for development agreements is to use, I don't know why this term was used, but they call it a float-up process. And basically what that means is that before the formal entitlement process commences, before EIRs are prepared and so forth, a developer asking for a development agreement on a typically fairly substantial project brings it before the council at a preliminary design stage in order to get feedback on the concept, the land uses, the form and configuration of the project, and to have some preliminary discussion about community benefits that might be incorporated into the project. And then that provides the developer some constructive feedback about, and that's a public hearing, of course, and so the public comes and offers their opinions. And that is good for the council because it gives them an early peek at a project that is going to come back to them later for entitlement decision making, and it's very useful to the developer to get a read from the decision makers on the council and to hear from the public about the issues that may become involved in the course of fine-tuning the project for ultimate approval.
Thank you. I think your guidance certainly regarding how other communities do this is very useful. I mean, we can't be reinventing the wheel here. I mean, this has been going on in other jurisdictions, so I would certainly look to larger jurisdictions like our friends to the north in San Francisco, who are like-minded people, if you will, when it comes to public policy, as perhaps, somebody that could give us some guidance and direction in this. Since we're on this your guidance, Paul. Can you give me a little background related to that, how other cities look at this RLV and then take that number, and then what number do they use in their negotiation? In other words, when they look at the public benefit, are they looking at that RLV and they say, okay, there's a $5 million or a $10 million RLV, you know, is that something that they would normally say split with the developer, or is that something they would say, nope, that's the full public benefit component that we would expect to somehow be created?
Well, as I said, it doesn't define the boundaries of the negotiation, and it just provides an order of magnitude for consideration. Because recall that the term residual land value it means that the calculation is deriving what a reasonably experienced, well-informed, and well-capitalized developer could technically afford to pay for the land, but it doesn't include the actual cost of the land. Right. So that has to come out of the equation somewhere too.
But that comes out in the hard costs.
No.
No?
No. No. What we are doing is deriving the value of land. We are not putting the land value into the calculation.
Okay.
So, you know, the cost of acquiring the land, if it hasn't already been acquired, you know, is a consideration. But there are other things that jurisdictions typically try to take into account when they do these kinds of negotiations, beside just the incremental difference in the investment return indicator for the developer. Recall that larger projects also mean that the tax revenue profile of the project to the city is likely to be somewhat larger than the base case. So that's another form of community benefit, you know, that is flowing through as a result of larger projects. The scale of employment and other indicators of economic activity are likely to be somewhat larger because the project is bigger. So that's another consideration that decision makers often try to keep in the back of their mind as they're conducting these negotiations. And then finally, the whole opportunity to seek higher scale of entitlement is in your general plan and zoning code, because you have already made decisions that projects of that scale under certain circumstances and in certain places are a good thing for the city. And so clearly you don't want to get into a situation where you're negotiating so heavily for every dollar that you cause the project to become financially infeasible, and neither the developer nor the city gets the benefit out of the project in the end. So it's a very delicate balancing act, but the idea of having this calculation is to have one indicator of what the benefit to the developer is from the higher scale of entitlements to inform that negotiation.
Okay. And related to that, all those components, do other communities also take into account any potential negative impacts, such as loss of use, a loss of public benefit that would be the result of the development? Do they do the financial impact of that? In particular, using the examples that are in your package here, 8899 Beverly included the loss of an easement and trees and a public space that the community no longer has the benefit of. And so,
not explicitly, but that doesn't mean it couldn't be.
Okay.
So again, these are all done on project-specific circumstances. So no two projects are ever alike, as you know, from looking at lots of them over the years. But if there were a particular project where something important to the city or the neighborhood is being removed as a result of the project, it might be appropriate for that to become one dimension of the negotiation, not necessarily the residual land value calculation, though depending on what it is, it could. But I would say that might become an element of the negotiation for what the city wants out of the project.
Thank you. Now, back to the baseline that you're establishing. Are there any cities or circumstances that do varying baseline analyses? In other words, that baseline, for example, if we took this project at a baseline height, size, et cetera, and it's all retail, what's that number? If we took that at all condos, what's that number? And do the comparison. How is that baseline project determined? Because the revenue stream, et cetera, varies obviously depend on the type of project, but the size would be the same height, the same, you know, footprint.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I haven't seen it done. What you're describing is essentially a sensitivity analysis on the baseline,
Yes.
and I don't recall having seen that done. Usually, the way the baseline project, the zoning compliant project, is defined is based on a conversation, you know, with city staff and a review of typical projects in that location under those zoning regulations and so forth. So I think it would be somewhat unusual to do the kind of sensitivity analysis you're suggesting, but that's not to say it couldn't be done.
You know, you could have some fairly significant swings in your baseline depending
Right.
on the revenue stream that you're choosing
Right.
to set as the baseline.
Yeah, and it would depend entirely on whether the scenarios you're describing, you know, make market sense for a particular, you know, you wouldn't do it just to run the numbers.
Correct.
What you would be looking for is, you know, presumably a situation in which market conditions suggest that a developer might choose equally between some options, and that's not always the case.
Related to that, does anyone ever do, you know, we have an EIR that has alternates.
Right.
Do any other jurisdictions sort of evaluate the alternates in a similar scenario?
They may. I don't obviously know every case
Sure.
in every city, so that may be possible. I can't think of a specific. No, I take that back. I believe that there have been some development agreement projects we've worked on in Santa Monica where over the course of a protracted entitlement process, as a project evolved, or whether there was some hot debate about a sort of usually a lower scale alternative to the proposed project, where we were asked to run this kind of value enhancement simulation on more than just the base case and the proposed project. So that certainly could be done.
I just see that you would have scenarios potentially, and that could inform your negotiation. Okay. I have more questions for later, but okay.
Commissioner Altschul?
In years past, for many years past, up until maybe, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago, there was always a preliminary hearing on the environmental impact report at the Planning Commission during the comment period. That was taken away and taken out because, I don't know why, except it was abolished. So that element of public process was gone forever, at least up until now. And now they're coming forward and trying to insert an element of public process among, in West Hollywood on this particular issue. Does that totally make sense?
Well, I mean, it does for this process. I can't really speak to how we used to do things regarding EIRs, but I imagine it's somewhat related to you making a recommendation or a determination of certification. But regarding this process, I do think it's really important for this to come before the Planning Commission and have this conversation in an open forum before City Council and allow you to advise them.
How many of our neighboring cities, Santa Monica, Culver City, Los Angeles, Beverly Hills, have this process?
Do you mean this public benefit process?
Yes.
Santa Monica, Culver City, Los Angeles does it in some circumstances, not all. And there are probably, I don't know, 12 or 15 other cities up and down the coast of California, in particular in the very strong real estate markets, that also do this. And almost all of them are using a similar analytic technique.
You know how many of these same cities have the process of having a public comment period on the EIR
I couldn't speak to individual city procedures, but it's fairly typical to have some public forum during the notice of preparation process. Sometimes that's done by an applicant-sponsored public meeting, and in other cases, it's done with a more formal meeting in front of a decision-making body. But it just varies from city to city.
So, on this. For this, which is the purpose of it, is to engage the public early on major projects that might come before the city, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to help and to be more transparent, because one of the things that have been happening is these development deals have been going through, and the public gets outraged sometimes because they don't understand why the city did what they did, or whether the city is really getting anything or enough out of a project, particularly billboards and tall walls and those kinds of things, which are not the whole project, but there's something attached to a project. So is that going to be something that would go through this process also?
This actually specifically would not apply to billboards.
Why not?
Because billboards would have, and as part of the billboard policy that we're working on right now, they have a separate process for benefits.
So they would no longer be part of development agreements?
That's not necessarily the case. The billboard proposal that's before the council right now would obviously require public benefits for those projects. Those are all negotiated. New billboards are all negotiated development agreements. There is absolutely a public benefit from those projects, and some of the language in the policy suggests that that a portion of those benefits at least be directed towards public space improvements on Sunset. And so there absolutely is a consideration for specific needs related to the community on Sunset.
With the city council, since it's not, obviously those things aren't going to come before our commission, it's going to go directly from the negotiation to the city council, right? And but are they going to be using the same menu of possible public benefits to determine and analyze the value of those to the city? Would they go through this same mathematical evaluation?
No, a billboard valuation is a separate calculation from the development-based calculation that is here. So the billboard portion of a project or a standalone billboard were that to take place has its own evaluation scenario that would be dealt with separately.
Shouldn't there be some kind of formal process for that too? To determine so that it's consistent from one project to another?
Well, I think it specifically wasn't included in this because this derives from language in the general plan that says we're setting standards and we're only going to change those standards and give you more height or more density if you provide public benefit. So this was intended to respond to that language, and that only has to do with development, not with a standalone sign, which I understand, mathematically could use this, but I think this project was intended to respond to that general plan language.
Okay, so this seems it seems speculative. I mean, you make a determination and a mathematical analysis based upon what's happening at a given moment, and then the economic circumstances could change by the time the development is actually being developed. So how do you account for that?
Well, that is true, but we're essentially doing the same calculus that a developer goes through when they're proposing a project to the city. So neither we nor you are any more or less disadvantaged than they are at any particular moment in time. So what we're essentially doing is shadowing exactly the same kind of analysis that a typical developer would do in order to figure out whether a project makes sense for them or not.
So the menu of public benefits that we might use are similar to the menu that other cities close to us have, or is this something new?
As Rachel explained in the first part of her introduction, the list of example community benefits that she displayed for you are directly responsive to your general plan. So the idea is to take the policy framework that has been adopted by the City Council for West Hollywood as the framework for essentially the predefined priority public benefits that should be negotiated for in any project. And then in addition to that, there are likely to be some more neighborhood-specific issues that come up having to do with the specifics of an individual project. But in all the cities we've worked for, similar kinds of things on the list that Rachel provided to you are among the topics that many cities negotiate for. They're just shades of difference having to do with the policy setting of that city.
So is this process designed to fit a project of a particular size? In other words, how do we know which of the developments are going to go through this process?
So truly any project that has a development agreement, like I said, a zone text amendment, general plan amendment, a specific plan, either new or amended, and the zone map amendment, which, for example, could be to implement the avenues bonus. Those types of projects, with very few exceptions, as I previously explained, would automatically be required to go through this process. And we really designed this process to insert into our existing entitlement process so that it kind of flows with how a project gets reviewed already.
Yeah, it's really a function of the kind of discretionary decision that's involved. And they are all projects in which there is some significant scale difference between an otherwise zoning compliant project and what a developer is asking for. And in the memo in our memo that's attached to your staff report, we gave you essentially worked examples of 4 different projects, which are all very different from one another. And therefore, you can see that there are different combinations of land uses and different scales of development. But it's really just, it's a function directly of the kind of entitlement that's required for the project.
Thank you.
One more. Is there any element of this that perhaps would tend to lessen the political part of this?
Well, I'm sure the staff can speak to the West Hollywood specifics.
A few years, there was a hue and cry about one particular project that was assumed by a lot of people to be undersold in the development agreement. Does that have anything to do with this?
Underzoned?
Undersold.
Oh, undersold.
Like there was not a real public benefit.
In short,
no, that
yes.
was a real public benefit, but the public benefit was not compensated.
Was it sufficient or?
Right. These are inherently controversial projects. These are all cases in which a developer is asking for something out of the ordinary to one degree or another. And so they typically involve larger projects, which tend to be more controversial. And sometimes the uses, individual uses, are controversial. So I don't know that there's any way to sort of eliminate controversy in this case.
No, I'm not talking about controversy. I'm talking about the political aspect. We were told for years that the commission and the public really has no say or input in this particular aspect of development. Now, here we are in 2017, and it does, or will.
And who's doing the negotiating?
I'll answer that in just a moment. Part of the intent of this project is to increase the level of transparency to the public. We've tried to frame the policy proposal pretty carefully so that there's transparency and predictability in the process for the public and for the developer. It's not intended to sort of explode the development timeline in terms of the approval process, but to provide a designated time for community input based on already adopted city plans. So there's a framework to that discussion. And having,
which is admirable.
Yeah, and
why not consider at this point reinstating the public input and public testimony on a draft EIR?
Yeah.
We certainly could look into that.
What?
We certainly could look into that outside of this
okay.
framework conversation.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I'm sorry, Chair, your question?
I want to know who's doing the negotiating on this.
It's so it's a team of staff from the city, typically the city manager and the city attorney, and then other appropriate senior staff.
And city council members? Are they involved in the negotiation?
They're not directly negotiating the agreement, but they're responsible for approving the agreement ultimately.
Right, and
So it's
you
basically
can imagine that
senior
there are
staff.
good reasons. There are good reasons for the council to keep some distance from the process because, I mean, politically there are reasons, of course, but you're ultimately acting in an official capacity to make recommendations to the city council, and it can sort of blur the lines between your statutory role. Sorry if I'm intruding, but it can sort of blur the role between your official role and the process.
So the point at which the public gets involved is before the negotiation or during the negotiation?
Before the negotiation.
Before.
Exactly,
So
so that the
that-
negotiation would have that public input.
So that would be considered in the
Specifically,
negotiation?
It would be at the required neighborhood meeting for the project. That would be advertised on the notice, as Rachel mentioned earlier, and the conversation would take place at that meeting, which already happens as part of the project process. And there would be essentially an agenda item added to that meeting that would include discussion of community preferences for a benefit with that project.
And it would also be after the project comes to before commission?
So the
Or
public
at the
input
same time, or?
After we have the community meeting, the next opportunity for people to physically come and provide comment on public input would be at the public hearing for the item before the Planning Commission, and then ultimately at the public hearing for the item at the City Council. There will be no, as
When
proposed,
does
there are
the
no additional
negotiation
meetings.
take place?
The negotiation takes place before the Planning Commission hearing so that you have a proposal on the table to respond to.
So, but that negotiation is the final terms of the deal?
I mean, it's essentially a work in progress until the council makes a final approval. So in some cases, there have been additional negotiations. For example, if the Planning Commission makes a very strong recommendation in one particular direction that changes the project, they may go back to negotiating additional items. And again, it provides the flexibility to allow for that until it's finally approved.
Okay.
Did Commissioner Bass?
I would like to say that I liked this item. I don't really share many of the same concerns that I'm hearing, in as much as I have yet to face one of these as a planning commissioner. So as I look at it, I believe I could make a more informed decision about these discretionary items if I have an idea of what that public benefit is going to be.
Right.
Because I believe the benefit informs whether or not we should have that, whether or not we should use our discretion to allow that project. So I think it's only beneficial. I think that it will take politics out of it to some degree, because I believe some members of the community, I can picture a scenario where somebody at a community meeting says, why don't you do this? And ultimately what appears before the council is that very idea. And although that idea might have ended up there anyway, I believe that people will feel like they're heard that way. So I don't have much to say except I like what's here. So those are my comments.
I definitely like the transparency part. I think it's really important in our community in particular that the public be engaged in the process early, and so that they know that we're really working toward making our community better and to meet the needs of the public.
And I agree, and I think whoever it was that pushed this forward should be commended.
Raise your
So,
hand.
Chair?
Come on, Bianca.
Yes,
It was you.
Yes, go
So
ahead, Ms.
I would agree. I think that the conceptually, and I know council's been wanting this to happen for quite some time, and I would agree entirely. I love the public transparency. I would love for you to revisit what we talked about earlier in terms of making it a bigger forum and an earlier forum to more incorporate the larger community, because these are large projects. So I would I would recommend that you look at that in terms of the process.
Public outreach.
The public outreach, and back to, you really said it well, Rachel, and we've all said it about 12 times, transparency, transparency, transparency. So anything we can do to facilitate that, I think, is only for the good. I have some concerns about some areas. I don't want to get into the weeds. It's very late at this hour. I think conceptually, I'm 100% with this, et cetera. I do have concerns about the economic valuation tool itself. Unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to review it in the math, et cetera, et cetera. And I think at its heart, absolutely, it's something that works. Certainly conceptually, having a valuation is a metric. It's a starting point. It's a basis for negotiation. It's not the be-all. It's not the end-all. And I would agree entirely, Paul, this is an art as much as it is a science. You can make these spreadsheets pretty much say and do anything. So my concern is I would like to be able to review that as part of this process to make sure that we are incorporating all of the elements that we really want to. And back to some of my earlier questions about deductions and those kinds of things.
Sure. Yeah, no, we'd be happy, perhaps at another time to answer other questions that you might have about the particulars. But I also wanted to assure you that the results of the project-specific analysis, once it's done, is part of the package that comes to you and the council.
Sure.
So you get to see the details on every case where this applies.
And that would be an important consideration to make sure. And in my brief 15-second review at 5 o'clock tonight, it's in the end, most of these financial projections, it's all about the underlying assumptions. The basic math of this times that is basic math, but it is about what are those economic underpinnings of the assumptions. And Commissioner Guy was very generous this afternoon with me and walking through capitalization and his opinions on capitalization, et cetera, in this community, because one man's that's too high is another man's that's too low. And, what is, the right number to be using, because especially the cap rate can fundamentally change the resulting metric.
Yes, you're absolutely right. It is one of the most sensitive variables in the whole analysis. I would say the per square foot construction cost, the assumptions on all the income side of the equation, the rents and the purchase prices for condos, and the cap rate.
Are the three biggest
drivers. Those are
drivers.
the most sensitive in the whole analysis.
And that's what when we spoke this afternoon, that's what I most wanted to wrap my head around, because that was a driver, of these analyses. And so I would like to make a motion. We are missing a key commissioner this evening, and this is also a special meeting. And I think this is a really important policy. This is really I think this is going to be a great policy for us. I think it's going to give us some real opportunities to have some really great metrics and some good information to make good decisions. But I'd like to make a motion to continue us until our first meeting next month, or January, when we have a full commission, we have a fully noticed meeting, and we've had an opportunity to review these components. And maybe staff has an opportunity to address some of the things we just talked about. And at that point, we would be able to really make a really full and robust recommendation to council. I'm not saying that we delay this forever. I just think that I personally don't feel I can make my fiduciary decision based upon the information that I have.
I may be wrong, but we're not making a recommendation. We're just giving input. Is that correct?
That's correct. We're just looking for comments
this
evening.
not like we're sending it up to council with a recommendation
but
that they approve it or that they adopt it or anything. We're just giving input.
That's
but
correct.
You're going to present this to council on the 16th.
On January 16th, that's the
with our
that's
comments.
With your comments.
Okay. I'm going to just simply say I have no ability to make my comments on the economic valuation tool, which is one of the key underpinnings of this recommendation, because I don't have the information.
Okay. Anybody want to address that issue?
So if there's no second, I would make an alternate motion of receiving and filing this with our comments.
I would second that.
Go ahead and tap. What was that? To
receive and file.
Receive and file. I'm sorry, but it said that I made the motion, but it really is a motion by Commissioner
It says
Bass.
that I made the motion. It says that the chair made the motion instead of me.
So I just want to correct the record that the motion is
you can reset. It's been reset. You can
Okay.
Okay. we're both voting the same way, so I don't know that it matters all that much, but.
Share it. Okay, thank you so much. I think it's a very exciting project. So, next item is number 12, unfinished business. Number 13, excluded consent calendar. There is none. Items from staff, planning commission, managers update. Any update?
I don't have an update this evening, although can I ask David if you could read the vote from the last item?
Oh, do you want to hear a vote?
Just because we can't see it on the screen, so we just wanted to see it.
It was 5-1.
5-1.
Yes, 1 no.
Commissioner Hubenegger against. Okay, planning managers update, any? None? Okay, then public comment, is there any at this time?
No public comment.
No public comment at this time. Any items from commissioners?
Just one.
Just one.
I'm curious, I'd like to ask staff, is this tool, and as Paul already left, this tool, I love the metrics of this tool and how, you know, it can really get some analysis going. Would it be something that we could use to determine if a developer actually needs concessions to build affordable housing, given that it's showing, you know, how much residual value there is, and therefore there may or may not be need to provide concessions for building affordable housing?
I don't know the details of that, but that's not that wasn't the intent of the tool.
I know. This is an possible additional use of a tool that we've spent a great deal of time and money.
We could look into that with the consultant team.
And so that was my question to staff. Thank you.
Okay, and the next item, thank you, is for adjournment. Our next meeting will be a regularly scheduled meeting here on Thursday, December 7th at 6:30 p.m. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.